Hello, listeners. We are sitting here with Fire Chief Brian Schaeffer and Police Chief Jill Schlude. I am joined as always by my lovely co-host, David Lile. David, how are you?
Well, I'm good, but I've never been described as a lovely co-host before, so thank you for setting new ground already.
We like to break barriers here on the COMO Vanguard podcast. Well, listeners, as you can imagine and probably know by now before you even clicked on the show, we are here to talk all things public safety tax. We appreciate the Chiefs taking the time to sit down with us. We'll go ahead and get into the tax, but before we do, Chiefs, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. This is the first time we've had Chief Schaeffer on the show. Chief, thank you for joining us. And if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I go by Brian, and I've been here for right at 2 years. Recently moved from Spokane, Washington, and if you didn't know, I grew up in Southern Illinois and went to Central Missouri State. So I've got some connections to Missouri, worked here for about 10 years, and yeah, that's pretty well me.
Well, I'm Jill Schlude. I've been the police chief for about 2.5 years now. I've been with the police department for 21.5 years. I've actually lived in Columbia basically since 1995. So I've obviously seen a lot of growth and change.
Quite a bit in that time.
Yes.
As we'll talk about today with how much the city has changed and perhaps how much our police department has not changed in that time, and from a funding perspective especially. Let's jump into this. I do want to start, frankly, I'm just going to go down the lovely website that Columbia's put out.
Sure.
Talking about the tax. So just a level set for our listeners, this is a 1% sales tax that the city is saying, if approved come August, it would produce roughly $38 million annually. It'd be strictly for public safety. And on the fire department side, that would result over a series of years in 42 additional firefighters, 2 new fire stations, 3 fire stations renovated. And then on the police department side, 50 additional officers and new headquarters and modernized public safety tools. So my question to you, David, do you want to start fire or police?
Let's go fire department first.
Yes.
Chief Schlude is hoping that all the time will run out before we get to the other.
No, not at all.
It was an exasperating thought. Yeah.
We've only had this conversation 1,000 times already.
So that is one of my curiosities. You've talked about it so much. You've got a lot more to talk about before August gets here. People can start voting, I think, 3 weeks into July. So some people will do it early just so they can turn it off in their mind and not think about it anymore. But during this process, are you hearing anything that has surprised you or anything that people bring up maybe as objections or support that you hadn't anticipated?
Not yet. No, this has been fairly encouraging. I think the most disappointing part that I've had is the feedback about the distrust with city government from 30 years ago. And when I look to my left, right, up, down, and all around, none of those people are here anymore. So you've got a new team of players that are leaning in, trying to do the right thing, but I think we're getting saddled with the, call it sins. You mentioned the Bible earlier, so I thought I'd throw that back at you. But we're suffering the sins from past, and it's simply coming from the outside. I don't see it. I see a very talented group of people that want to do the right thing, that recognize a gap in service and a need, and they actually gave Jill and I the opportunity to put together a plan, and they're supporting us. So everything from my perspective has been positive. The only negative has been some of that past history that we have to try to outlive.
And you kind of inherited that, as you mentioned, because you come from the outside. You haven't been here that many years. When you are analyzing that or looking at that and adopting that history, how many times have you said to yourself, wow, how did they not do this earlier?
Pretty frequently. I think both of us. Yeah, both of us. But you know what? We weren't there. And it's really easy to armchair quarterback this stuff. And I certainly don't want to point any fingers because it was a different time. But this is our time and our collectively time. And we know that we have a gap in service and we've got the people that could do a much better job. We just to enable them to do that, we need the additional funding, the facilities, the apparatus, and definitely the people.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, I'm kind of the resident historian, which we
old?
joke is that I'm really
sorry.
old, even though he's older than me. I'm just older at the
Cut
city.
that part out.
In the history of how we got here, and we talk about this when we kind of do our presentation, I think it's important because a lot of the people we're talking to, some of them have lived here their whole lives. Some have lived here 5 years, some have lived here 20 years. And so the perspectives are very different on their recognition of maybe how we got here. But from my perspective, it's really kind of been this quiet building over time. If you go back 20 years, 26 years, actually, I went back in the city budgets. So this city has not gotten smaller. It grows at about 1.8%, bordering on 2% every year, which is different than some of the other cities in Missouri. And so we have that sustained growth where every year we're getting bigger. From 2000 to forward, we basically added Jeff City in population, and we've annexed on many, many more square miles that we're responsible for providing public safety for. And so when people, I think some people are like shocked, why is this happening? Why do we need this? Well, number one, if you look around Missouri, this is happening all over. I was at a meeting with the Joplin police chief last month, and they just enacted a quarter-cent sales tax there in Joplin for public safety. Jeff City's had one for about 5 years, I believe. They're going back to the well because they did not ask for enough. And so we tried this. We tried property tax in 2014. It failed miserably. I think the feedback I heard at that time was people really felt like that burden should not completely be on property owners, especially in a college town where we have a lot of people here that are not property owners. So this is built over time, and I think there's some outlying factors like COVID. If from police perspective in general, we had Ferguson, had George Floyd. We had all those things that kind of hurt recruitment. So absolutely, we've needed 50 cops for 10 years if you go back and look in the media and when that was first brought up. But it was really hard to hire during some of those years. I mean, 2014 to 2021 was rough for law enforcement to do hiring. Well, now we're kind of coming out of that, thank goodness. I'm going to knock on wood too. And for a lot of different reasons, but I think people recognizing that when you think of it in the place of we had more officers per 1,000 people in 2000 than we do today. And so we're actually going the opposite direction. We're backsliding the opposite direction. And that is, I think, shocking sometimes to people, but when you really look at it, it makes a lot of sense.
I think you touched on a great point that I was thinking about bringing up later, but you touched on it, so I want to, dive into it now.
Sure.
Talking about this, this need has been going on for a long time. Right. We've been talking about 50 police officers for several years now. And I believe at one of the April, May council meetings where this was being discussed, that you both were essentially saying, hey, this is about playing catch up. So with that in mind, one of my concerns as citizen, let's say I'm inclined to support this, right? We need this. I want to help fund it. I'm going to vote yes. A concern I have in that situation is, to the Jefferson City example, is this enough?
So, I'm sure Brian can chime in on this too. We very deliberately, the city, when I say we, the city looked very deliberately at what different levels look like. What does a half cent look like? What does 3/4 of a cent look like? And in every one of those scenarios, it couldn't do all the things that we need to do at this point. Because the reality is 50 cops, and we need more than 50 cops, just being totally honest. We needed 50 cops 10 years ago. But we have to find a way to dig out of the hole and catch up, but then stay out of the hole, right? This amount of money gives us the ability to go, okay, if we know we're growing 2% every year and we just annexed on another 1.5 miles, what does that look like for public safety services? And we just never had that plan here. You want to talk a little bit about the planning piece?
You caught me right in a yawn.
Sorry.
Way to go. When we do our dog and pony show, one of the things that I recognized really early was that the city of Columbia has never really budgeted to a plan. They've always planned to their budget. So the city manager and the council would give the department $1 and say, figure it out. The department directors would do the best they could with the dollar. The reverse and what right should look like is that city manager expressing to the department directors, what outcomes are you trying to achieve? How do you intend to get there? And how much does it cost? Until, we put together this plan, that's never happened. We're doing that now. And essentially, we're asking the public to support this plan to reduce the level of risk, whether it's violence and crime in her case, or fires and medical emergencies and the type of things that we go to in our case, because it all comes together. So we do have a plan. That's what right looks like. I'll toss it back to you.
So just to dig into a little further, because I appreciate your point of this tax has a plan. Right on the website and all the communication, I'm looking at it right now. The disbursement timeline, as it's labeled, is essentially a 10-year plan going through 2035. It was everything from 2027 being the renovation of Fire Station 4 to 2035, the last thing in this timeline at least, being new Fire Station 13. But I still am concerned. I guess the follow up to my question would be, if this gets us out of the hole, so to speak, as you said, what's next? I assume. You said, well, we need more than 50 officers. Well, what's the plan for addressing that? Like, this gets you the 50, but you need more than that, and the fire department needs more than what it's asking for ultimately, and certainly in the longer term. What does that look like?
And I think you see on there's some monetary amounts attached to
Mhm.
those things. So I think the personnel piece alone is right around 23, $24 million. And the people are always going to be the most expensive, right? The other thing about the people are that's a ongoing cost. So we talk about one-time money versus revenue streams. People are always going to be an ongoing revenue stream, right? But I need a new building. And so in order for us to move in, we'd really like to use the IBM building down south. That save taxpayers a lot of money. That's about a $37 to $40 million project. But that is not an ongoing thing. Of course, it has to have building maintenance. I understand all those things, but that's not $40 million every year for that building. So once that movement's made, and frankly, I say this, if anybody saw the movie Money Pit with Tom Hanks, that is the downtown police station to a T. Like every day it's something different is going wrong. And so we spend a lot of money just band-aids on that building. He's got the same issue with different fire stations. And so just getting into some place where we have what we need there. We're not constantly spending $80,000 on an air conditioning unit and another $500,000 fixing the parking deck. That's just throwing money away, in my opinion. So moving into this, the other unrealized and kind of technical thing that this helps us do is the pension is a huge part of this, right? The pension's underfunded. We've got to get our unfunded liabilities. We're on the governor's watch list. So we're, of course, not going to hire 50 cops and 42 firefighters in year one. Probably not in year two either. We've done some very aggressive hiring, but we also have a capacity of how many people we can train and hire a year. So knowing that, a very reasonable questions come up is, okay, so what happens with that money that you're not spending on personnel? Well, the idea, our preference, and definitely what I've heard from the council and the city manager, is that gives us the opportunity to make some extra payments into the pension, which helps drive that down. The great thing for us is not only is the pension liability reduced, that frees up personnel money for us. 28% of our personnel money right now is going towards that unfunded pension liability. So the quicker we fix that, the quicker it puts more money back in our pockets to do exactly what you're saying, which is keep caught up with hiring.
But kind of what I'm hearing you ask though is what's the end? Like, are you going to run out of money? Is kind of the way I'm expecting or
Right.
interpreting your
Or
question.
like Jefferson City is doing, teachers are talking about, right? Like having to come back in 5 or 10 years.
And I think, and we debated this, like, do
Right.
you try to do what feels a little safer and ask for a smaller amount? And looking around, and it was funny because I had a conversation with the chief in Jeff City just a couple months ago, and he kind of previewed to me that he thought they were getting ready to go back. We said that is a bad idea, and I know they hate having to do that. That's really, I think that's harder than what we're doing right now,
Oh,
honestly.
absolutely.
And so I'd rather tell people, hey, this gets us where we need to be. It's a sustained funding. Of course, we're going to have to be very mindful about how we steward that money, but the projections that finance has done are very conservative as far as how much growth that sales tax will have over that time. So it's not some overblown, oh, it's going to be Christmas every day. We're going to have to, but based on everything we're seeing, even after we make the pay increases we need to make, that's a whole nother thing hopefully we'll talk about, and sustain, I think we're still going to be in really good shape. And we're still getting that $60 million general fund transfer every year that we get now.
That's what I wanted to ask about the pay increases, because you talk about hiring the new firefighters or police officers and also about their pension. But I'm looking at the list that Nick referred to a moment or two ago, and where do the figures come in? Because you've also provided on that website showing where the salaries are for Columbia police officers, and they're well above St. Joseph, but everybody else has better
which is half our size.
salaries than what Columbia is offering. And in order to attract new, you're going to have to offer starting salaries that are going to be competitive and probably nicer than what they would get elsewhere. So is that also figured in here someplace? Because salaries are not going to go down over the next 10, 20, 30 years. They're going to go up. So I don't think that there's going to be too much money in this sales tax that people are going to have to say, well, are you finding excuses to spend it all?
Right. So we're in a situation right now. We probably about the time you started at the city, we really started making some huge movements in pay, which is a long time coming, right? Huge appreciation to the city manager and the council that was willing to move that forward because it was needed all across the city. So just as recently as 2 years ago, we were in like the top 3 in the state as far as starting pay. Just in that short amount of time, we've now slipped back down to number 9 because, as Chief Schaeffer likes to call it, we're in an arms race for public safety professionals. If you are in public safety and you have not gotten fired, you can pass the background check, You're not a complete weirdo in your interview, just being honest. We're going to hire you. Somebody's going to hire you. And so we want the best and brightest people. We don't want just the baseline. And so we want to attract the people that are the absolute best, especially for this community. And to your point, David, that's exactly right. Part of this has to be, and my preference would be putting everybody on a defined step plan. If you look at some other cities, I believe Springfield, you can go to their website. If you're a police officer applying there, coming in the door what you're going to make, year 5 what you're going to make, and that's only going to move up because of course those pay bands are going to have to move over time, exactly like you said. But that is something that has to happen under this, because the only way, because the second piece of this is retention, right? It's great we can hire 100 cops and 100 firefighters. If we can't keep them, it's all for nothing. We don't want to be the training ground for all these other cities, and that's what we'll turn into if we don't stay competitive. So that has to be a huge part of it.
I have a question for Chief Schaeffer, just because I'm, again, referencing this website, which is, for our listeners, it is filled with data points, information. If you haven't visited it, definitely go take a look.
And it is, if you want the note, it's oneforsafety.org.
That's right.
Spell out one.
So on this, it displays, as David just noted, the salary differences for the police, but unless I miss it, it doesn't do that for the fire staff. And so I'm curious if you could shine some light on it from that angle. Is it similar in terms of how uncompetitive we are, or is that in a better position?
No, it's actually in the same position. One of the challenges with the fire departments or the fire services, they're two different organizations. They're fire protection districts they're political subsets, but they are their own. They're their own taxing entity. And then there are municipal fire departments. If you just look at the municipal fire departments, Springfield, Independence, Lee Summit, we're at the bottom of those, unfortunately. When you broaden it to include fire protection districts, it gets even worse. So I didn't include any of that information because it's not apples and oranges. Many of those agencies also have ambulances. So it, again, got kind of like what we saw through some of the data with what Jill was working on. Many of those sources also had dispatch centers that, you had to spare seats that you had to remove and modify. So we just tried to, the only thing that we put on that website is verified, valid data. And I couldn't validate it quick enough and make sense of it.
While we're on the subject of the fire department and staffing, a big thing that's on there is talking about the potential to have 4-man crews.
Four-person
crews.
Yeah, we have women.
Could you expand on that, share to our listeners, like the difference that makes?
It basically doubles our effectiveness. When Columbia was a small town, 3 people was probably acceptable. Today, with the level of density and the larger buildings that we have, both vertically and horizontally, and the standard that we, being an accredited agency, that we are being benchmarked to meet, 4-person is the minimum for us. So that's always been a goal. Every day that we come to work, we look to see how many people we have. And if we have anyone extra, we put them to create a 4-person crew. But, unfortunately, with FMLA and sick time and training time and vacations, it's really hard to get to that point, probably, down to 10% of the year where we're able to actually have a 4-person capability. So that's the goal, to be able to give us the ability to achieve our benchmark, which has been long sought after. And then, say yesterday we had a fire on the exterior of a house. It was a duplex, 2-story. We had to search both of those units at the same time. If we had a 4-person crew, we could send ladder 1 to both of those units, search them, rescue any victims. With a 3-person crew, you can only search 1. So tactically, it gives us an incredible amount of effectiveness, and it's a great tool.
I want to put a plug in for our neighborhood. I can't remember, it was a neighborhood night out or whatever it was. Anyway, firefighters came, they brought a couple of trucks, and neighbors and neighborhoods should do this, and they should do it with the police also. And there were police officers there, because what a great opportunity to talk with a crew from a station, because they did talk about moving to 4 and how important that was. And these are people that are the frontline people that are either in the precinct or the beat, and also in the fire station. So I would just put a plug in for neighborhoods need to do that and need to bring out people who are doing the work.
Well, and that's the decisions in our agencies are made predominantly from the people that are closest to the work. They're the ones that are the most important. They interface with the public. They know their work. When they want a tool, we don't go to conferences and just, hey, that looks shiny and pretty. The people on the ground are the ones making the decisions about the tools and deployment.
I want to go back to something that the police chief said a little while ago. So people, and you've got this on the website that Nick's been talking about also, the major city services that should be emphasized, and public safety comes out on top. And I understand that, and you understand that. So people want public safety, but at the same time, they're leery about paying. It's like anything. It's like
Sure.
clean, good water
Right.
or working sewers or electricity that works every time you flip the switch. We want that, but we don't want to pay for it. We don't want to have to pay more for it. So one part of my brain says that as long as we are surviving and seem to be getting by, then you know what? We want public safety, but it's not that bad. I mean, there are peaks where it's bad, and last fall was one of those peaks. But overall, I think day to day, a lot of people seem okay. I'd like more, but we're getting by. And it reminds me of kind of like the garbage collection in town. Prior to roll carts, it was nice to be able to set everything outside and know it was going to be picked up and not see any of the problems of that. And that's kind of how crime and public safety is. We're getting along okay. So people say it'd be nice to have more, but I don't want to pay for it. The other side is people would say it would be nice to have more. We can pay for it differently. So when you come across those who say, yeah, I'm definitely in favor of better public safety, but not a sales tax, they'll bring up the P word, prioritize.
I think a couple thoughts I have about that. So one is, I think, and I love the example you gave about the trash collection. I think if you ask the people that are actually doing the work, it's not going fine. Like if you're a police officer in the city of Columbia, for the first time in my history at the department within the past 3 years, we've had to put people on mandatory overtime shifts. We said, we don't have enough cops answering 911 calls today. You have to call somebody in and force them to work. You can imagine how popular that is. It's difficult to get a day off, to take vacation, because we have to have a minimum staffing number. And when I say minimum staffing, I frequently ask people when I go places, how many officers do you think are working right now? In a city this size, on average, we probably have between 12 and 14 patrol officers working. That is nowhere near sufficient for the complexity of the calls that we're responding to, just the sheer volume of traffic. It takes us longer to get places because the city is bigger, the traffic is worse.
And then we'll hear, so what about mutual aid?
Right.
Well, and you tell them about the MU and
Yeah, so
mean-
people say, well, why doesn't MUPD or the sheriff's department? Well, they have their own constituents and their own jurisdictions that they're responsible for. And MU in particular, they have. It's not just campus. MU owns tons of property in Boone County that those officers are also responsible for responding to, including the hospital and all the clinics. And so they don't have time to drop everything, which I touched base with Chief Weimer this week and said, hey, on average, how many officers do you have on at once? He said 3 to 5. Well, that's not a great number either, right? And the county is huge. So I'm quite sure that people that live in the county would prefer deputies to be patrolling the county and not coming in to have to bail the city out all the time. And so from the frontline officer perspective, it's not okay. It's far from okay. Running from call to call to call and having zero discretionary time to build relationships and do what everybody likes to talk about as community policing, that is not fulfilling. You just become a report taker, and that is not why most people signed up to do this job. I think secondarily, when you talked about the tax, I wanted to educate myself on this because I hear that feedback from people, and nobody's happy about it being a sales tax. I don't think there's anybody who thinks, but from everything I have researched, this is the best way, and property tax wouldn't get us there. The city can't levy enough property tax to get to $38 million. You're not even close. So what's the other options? Well, when you look at what the other options are that aren't a quote unquote regressive tax, none of those options are available to us. Statutorily, Missouri prohibits us from enacting an income tax specifically to the city of Columbia or any type of estate type tax. The city in St. Louis, they have their own independent income taxes. We cannot have that here in the city. So we're really out of options when it comes to that, which comes to people then saying, well, why don't you cut this or why don't they cut that in the budget? And so I appreciate some of the council members that go to these meetings with us. Councilwoman Sample brings the budget in printed form in a binder and she carries it around with her. And she says, hey, we have looked at this. If you can find $38 million in the budget that we can give to police and fire, we're all for it. And it has not been popular in some of the groups that we've gone to, but I have also said to some of them, hey, I understand this particular group or you as a person, you may think the Office of Sustainability is stupid, right? And you're entitled to that opinion. But do you know what the budget for the Office of Sustainability is? I do. It's between $800,000 and $900,000. I mean, no offense, and I know I don't want people to think we think of this as monopoly money because we don't, but that's not even 1% of the need, right? And there are a lot of people in this city who would say sustainability is in the top 5 things they're concerned about. So we have to be sensitive to those things too. You can't just gut entire departments and expect, you can't say, well, just get rid of cultural affairs with their giant budget, I think of less than $200,000. What's the trade-off there, right?
And people ask about grants. Why don't you hire? Why don't you go
Right.
after grants?
Because they're so prolific nowadays.
Right. Well, that's the first part. The first answer to that is that they are not. They're not available like they used to be. And the ones that are often have a match where it's reduced to in 3 years you have to pay
The whole amount.
100% of the person you're hiring. And then who wants to get hired on a grant and get laid off in 2 or 3 years? It is a very difficult situation, and they're just not out there anymore. It doesn't get us out of the hole that we're in.
I have to say this because I find it hilarious. While we're sitting here, I'm watching my car get ticketed.
I'm
and
sorry.
and I'm watching my countdown on Park Mobile. So that's an interesting.
Is it not expired yet?
No, I've got 36 more
Oh,
minutes.
you better screenshot it. I don't run parking anymore, so I can't help you with
I
it.
just find that hilarious. This is good
Take a
timing.
picture and put us and
Yeah, that's so good. There's a big window behind where the Chiefs are sitting, and
Be a
my,
great witness for you.
and my
Yeah.
car's out there. And I just watched it happen. That's hilarious. To get back on topic, I think everything the chief just said, both chiefs, is very valid. I also think, and someone here kind of mentioned it, but just to dig into it even more, is that a huge benefit for a city like Columbia in doing a sales tax, and nobody wants to raise
No.
their taxes, right? I don't want to pay more. No one does. But the benefit for our city is that we get to catch all the visitors.
Mhm.
Because I think it was in here or somewhere I read it that the portion of the revenue raised is roughly a third
Yes.
from visitors, or at least for people who do not live in the
Yes.
city limits, because we are such a transient community. We have the colleges, but we also host, thanks to Amy and her team at the CVB, an incredible number of
Yes.
events.
tons.
So to me, I'm like, one way to potentially look at it is like, if you're a citizen, it's not really 1%. It's like, 0.66 of 1% is the portion you're on the hook for in a way.
And we're capturing all of the, there's got to be, MU alone's 32,000 enrollment, so I'm guessing we're in the neighborhood of 40,000 students, most of which don't live here. So we're capturing all that revenue as well. And we are, very geographically isolated. It's not like if you live in St. Louis and you're like, well, I'm not going to go to the Sam's Club in O'Fallon. I'm going to drive next door to whatever. Here, we frequently encounter people who are like, oh, I come down from Moberly to go to Sam's. I come from Fulton. I come from Ashland. And so you're exactly right. We're able to capture all that as part of this. And one of the numbers we looked at during this process was the explosion of the daytime population of people just coming in to work. Of course, there's a number of people that also drive from here and go to Jeff City or wherever it is. But by far, there's a much greater influx of people into the community for work during the day. So we're well over a 200,000 population during the daytime, which is another public safety issue.
Well over. And that just brings inherent complexity of risks that we're not staffed for, that we need to be staffed.
So people will hear that, and I think you make a good point. I don't have a problem with the point. A lot of this money will come from those who are not living here, but I do live here, so I do go to the grocery store. I do spend $100, and I am going to pay a little bit more that will add up over the year. So, the argument is a good argument. You're right. It's a good way for us to tap those who don't live here and have them pay for part of what we want. But, people are also going to say, yeah, but still, I'm still paying more.
I think to your point earlier, that gels really well with it. So I think this just comes down to individual choice when you get to the poll and understanding that you got to take in your own individual thoughts about it, budget, whatever that is. At the same time, one of the reasons we're on this big educational campaign is that's really, and I'm glad you brought that up because I talk to a lot of people who, depending on where you live in the city, you might feel fine. You might feel like everything's fine, but the cops and firefighters on the front line don't feel fine. And frankly, that's a huge retention problem for us. One of the other reasons we can't dig out of this hole, I only have 15 vacancies right now of 8%. We were at 20% when I first was appointed. And so we can make those movements, but if you come in as a new officer and you're super excited and you're in year 2 and you can't get a day off or you're being forced to work overtime all the time and you're not getting appropriate raises, you're going to pack up your stuff and go on down the road. We actually have cops leave to go to jurisdiction where they're going to make less money because they're properly staffed. So I think recognizing, and my other question is always, and I don't mean it in a flippant way at all, is like, okay, well, what's the other options? Because we're open, like, we love options, talk about them all the time. We just don't know what the other option is. And we get asked, is there a plan B?
Yeah. And,
Right.
and there is no plan B. And the reality very clear about this part. And this is something we don't talk about, is that all the department directors were brought into a room, and it was made clear from our leadership that we were going to have a balanced budget presented to the council this year. No more deficit spending moving forward. That right now, I think is
Between $7 and $8 million we
between
had to
$7 and $8 million that we had to reduce. So our programs, personal protective equipment, you name it, has all been removed, and we had to submit a balanced budget without impacting people. So we're not going to lose physical people, but I did lose positions, not on the firefighting side, but on the civilian side, people that are in support positions. And that's right now. Our reality is that the revenues are not able to keep up with the current need. So next year, it's going to get worse. The year after that, it's going to get worse. Yeah, it is a priority question. Are we going to prioritize public safety or not? And we need to know, because if the answer is no from the public, there is no plan B, and we'll need to start ratcheting down and start looking at ways to differently deploy our services, reduction in force, those type of things.
wanted to bring up something that he touched on too, which is I think when we had those budget conversations, the whole basis for those was the city leadership is still very much prioritized compensation. They recognize to keep the people that we've been able to recruit and made these gains in raises, you have to at least keep up with the cost of living and hopefully inflation. And so the only way we were going to be able to give raises this year was if we cut from the budget. So that's why we were asked to do that, was otherwise people weren't going to get raises, and we knew what the outcome of that was going to be. We'd just fall back into the hole again. And so we went through that exercise, and that's really the only way to get there. So when people ask, I think some of this too is I don't think this was necessarily hidden, but I know, and I've talked about this in other venues. There were years I've been going to city council meetings in one capacity or another in the police department for about 12 years. And so I've worked under city managers that told us, do not ask for any positions. We're not even going to ask the council. Don't bring it up. Well, that's not a good strategy, in my opinion, because then how do the council know what the need is? To Brian's point, there's no plan. And if you don't tell those folks, hey, you need to know, 12 years ago, we're 50 cops short. That got mentioned then, and then it was shut down. Don't bring that up again. It's like, shh, be quiet. And then it keeps growing and growing and growing. And now here we are today. And so I think that's why it's blindsided some people a little bit, because they just felt like everything was going along fine. But then you look at, and I tell people, hey, we have 185 officer positions in this city. Springfield, Missouri has 40,000 more people, and they have at least 100 more police officers. I went on the chamber trip to Columbia, South Carolina last year. They are about as close to us as you can possibly get in size. The university's right there in the city, SEC school, 140,000 people, 380 police officers. So they have almost 200 more police officers than we do. And so I think that resonates with people, but they have to understand that this doesn't all happen in a vacuum. This isn't a tabletop exercise. We will have to do something. And for me, it's just answering 911 calls, right? That's my core duty. So if I have to start folding in other things, whether that's school resource officers or any other specialized assignments that I already don't really have a traffic unit. I don't have a downtown unit that I want. So it starts to be slim pickings, but that's what we have to do.
I think I'd like to touch on outcomes that we're talking about, and really outcome in terms of this conversation being the ballot. First, I have a statement, then a question. My statement is, in my opinion, if this fails at the ballot, what happens then? That to me is more the responsibility of council and the city manager to come up with an answer to that question. I don't think that's on you all as police and fire chief. My question then, because this impacts your departments and your roles. If this fails, can you provide color for us? What does that mean in terms of not just the services you're providing, but in terms of the staff morale? What does that look like?
Well, I just lost a firefighter the other day that went to another agency in the St. Louis area. The general feeling, I'm sure you'll hear this when you talk to our labor group, is they really want the support, because the incident volume and I keep mentioning complexity, but it's true. Fentanyl and the violence against responders and just the sheer number of incidents and trauma, the vicarious trauma that they're being exposed to and that they carry, weighs on them. And Jill mentioned somebody went to a smaller agency just to escape that. I think you'll see an exodus away from the Columbia Fire Department because they won't feel supported by their community. And that's just Brian's perspective. There are 100% deeply committed employees that are extremely talented that we have, and I don't want to lose one of those people. But at the same time, I think it would send a message, and I would understand if we did lose people. And then the consequences of that are all measurable. We're evidence informed. We measure every KPI possible from stroke, cardiac arrest, water on fire, you name it. And I can tell you what those consequences are, and they're not pretty. Every minute matters in what we do, whether it's heart muscle or if it's somebody that we're trying to save in a trench, in a dump, as an example, or in a bedroom that we have to crawl down a hallway to reach. So those outcomes are grim, and I'm not into fear.
No.
That's one thing that we have to balance. It's like we don't want to scare people, but at the same time, I want to provide the safest environment I can for my firefighters and her police officers and give you and your families the safest Columbia that we can. This is the only tool that we have right now to do that.
Uh, You both are very good at explaining the real big picture here and the dangers that exist and seeing it from the whole vantage point. How do you respond to people who just have a beef about some small slice of police work? Maybe they've been slow to get a response from an emergency from the firefighter side, but people get so locked into their own little experiences with public safety officers that the broader picture, which makes perfect sense, isn't impacting them.
Yeah, I would say they need to expand their worldview. Like, I think what gets lost a lot is these are all human beings, right? I have an organization made up of 270-ish human beings, and they all have, just like we do, things going on outside of when they come to work. And that by no means, we don't give them a free pass to be rude or not write the report they should write or not respond in the way they should respond. But I think I look at it, I reflect back on when I took a small break from police work to go back to school. I was in hospitality management. And so when I go to a restaurant and I get bad service or my food comes and it's cold, right? Or my steak's not cooked correctly. I don't not tip the server. I'm sure there's people that do. Now, if the server comes and is completely rude and inattentive, then I might not tip as much as I would, but I don't automatically jump to conclusions and go, oh, well, this is because somebody just wanted to give me whatever. I've worked in an environment where I know what it's like when you're short in the kitchen. You don't have enough people working the floor. The manager's been there for 2 shifts now, and everybody's just trying to do what they can to get by. And I think sometimes we don't extend that grace to people that are doing public service, and we don't see them as humans. And I'm going to connect this in a really strange way, but that to me, that is the key. That is why community policing has to be a priority. Like, we don't see each other as humans until we interact with each other more frequently.
And that's what I was saying about neighborhoods, being
Yes.
able to welcome in a non-emergency situation those who are workers. And one of the other reasons I brought this up is something that I know Nick is probably chomping to get at before we ran out of time. And he had said this before we started the recording about those who find certain things that are happening in law enforcement to be intrusive in their privacy, flock cameras or whatever it may be. Address those who say, I'm not going to vote for this because I don't like the way that they're invading my privacy.
I think number one, people should go back and understand that license plate reading technology in general has been around for 20 plus years. This is not new. The expansion of it is far more aggressive because the technology is far more cheap than it used to be, just to be really frank about it. I think you have to look at the total landscape. And my biggest frustration with that topic in particular is we're in a place in society right now where everybody just believes all the crap they read on the internet, just to be honest with you. Because I can sit and refute a lot of what they're saying with not a whole lot of effort because I actually read verified sources of things. And so I think you can make great arguments about privacy and all these different things. The courts at this point have said that it's not illegal. License plate reading technology is not illegal. But we also have safeguards, particularly in this community, where just because if this tax passes and we get money for technology, I just can't go on some spending spree and buy 700 drones and whatever everybody's afraid of. The council still has to approve every single expenditure. We have a surveillance technology ordinance that specifically dictates how those things are purchased and whether or not they're even going to be used in this community. But I think I would just encourage people, don't believe everything that you read on the internet. It's just not accurate. And everything from how long the data is kept to who has access to it, it's just There's a lot of people out there trying to scare people. We also have to recognize criminals are using technology. This has been an ongoing thing in law enforcement. There was a time when people didn't like body worn cameras, right? And now I would never be a police chief someplace where we didn't have body worn cameras. So I think it's going forward, it's always going to be about balance. It's always going to be about striking that right balance. And I think that's different in every community. So I think for us, it's just continuing to have those conversations. But I would also tell people, I think you can not like something about one thing and still acknowledge that, hey, if I need the police or the fire department to come, I want them to come as quickly as possible to whatever I have going on. And my big talking point right now too is for so long we have been trying to transition back to being a proactive police department. And to me, that is the key to so many different, we talk about crime prevention. It is non-existent as evidenced by the surveys that go on. People don't feel, because we're not. How can you go out and do any type of crime prevention activities when you just are like a robot responding to the calls over and over and taking a report and going on to the next crisis? So getting away from that reactivity is so key to back to you, Nick, outcomes. Right? The outcomes are always going to be better if we can attack problems on the front end rather than waiting for that call if something's already happened.
So while on the subject of flock cameras, just technology in general
Sure.
is part of the benefits of this revenue for both your departments. And so in addition to flock, which I'm sure is part of that, what else, whether it's police, I'm sure body cameras and stuff, but I'm very curious on the fire side because
Yeah.
I'm completely ignorant on what technology you guys will be implementing. I'm sure it's there, but if you could provide some color for our listeners on the technology investment that would be a result of this if it succeeded, what that would look like, and again, the outcome, the impact it would make.
Well, just like what Jill mentioned with the cameras and drones. So drones can be a very important piece or an important tool for us to use in lieu of a human being. The other day I mentioned the person that got trapped in the trench. There was a lot of methane gas and lower explosive limit. For us to put people down there versus using a drone just to scope the situation would have saved us a lot of time and would have been less risky. We don't have drones. We did at one point, and we didn't have the funding to keep the program going. Didn't have the pilots. It went away. We need that level of or that tool and that technology back in the organization. The way that we use our deployment, the way that we deploy across neighborhoods and make predictions, and that is all a software package that integrates with a number of different disparate sources like crime statistics. We're bringing crime statistics in and a number of other building and codes data sets into our systems, but we need software to analyze that so that we can make the most of the dollars that we do have. And then, in line with what Jill is talking about with working upstream, we're in the same situation. We're not in our schools as at all. We should be. Every single school at that critical age, we need to be involved in from a community risk reduction lens. A lot of our calls involve people of age or age people that are falling. Those are all preventable. If it's predictable, it's preventable. We know where these falls are occurring. We know where the cardiovascular disease is occurring. We know a lot of these data points. We just don't have an answer to them. So there's a number of pieces of technology, whether it is an automatic extinguishing agent for an at-risk or vulnerable home over a stove. Cheap to install, but we can install those if we had the people and the funding to do. And then take a step back. Everything that we do involves mobile data. We dispatch by proximity, meaning we have automatic vehicle location systems and the integration with PD so that we could see inside of situations is critical for us. But right now we can't integrate the systems. So everything from communication to mobile data to actual boots on the ground, enabling them with thermal imaging cameras, all important and definitely where we need to be. But we just don't have the funding today.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say from the police perspective, I just came back from a couple of really interesting experiences. I got to visit Axon, which makes our body worn cameras and our tasers and a host of other things that we use now. I went out to their headquarters and previewed a lot of technologies that are coming, which would scare a lot of the people that David was talking about. But when I look at technology, I look at it through the lens of risk management and efficiency. And those are the really two big things right now that I'm seeing trying to make strides in. Great example is our body worn cameras, the current cameras we have right now, have the capability to create a first draft of a police report based
Mm.
on everything it's ingesting. So, Dallas Police Department's moving to that system. That body worn camera can
Ours
also
did too.
translate 32 languages. Those things cost money, but imagine I watched real-time videos of a roadside interview where they had somebody trying to figure out what's going on. The person only spoke Russian. Well, how many cops in, Las Cruces, New Mexico speak Russian? I would venture a guess not many. But they were able to have that conversation. The camera knew what language that man was speaking and was able to translate it to the officer, and they could have a conversation. And so we look at things like that. Drones as first responders is a huge thing in police right now. St. Louis, O'Fallon, Overland Park, Kansas City, these are all coming online, and we've previewed them here. It is a risk management tool. Getting something in the sky, 911 call comes in, the drone goes up, it can look and see where somebody is. Somebody said the guy's got a shotgun. He doesn't have a shotgun. He's got a broomstick, right? That's completely different in the eyes of a police officer. Also, that efficiency piece, when we did kind of a test case here, just they did a preview for us, even mundane things when you think of like, hey, there's a car blocking a lane of traffic on Broadway. One of the 12 police officers has to go and get through traffic, find that car, see if they're really there, see what they need, which when we did this kind of dry test run preview, they deployed the drone from the top of City Hall. It was to the intersection within 30 seconds. It verified, no, the car's not there anymore. So a human didn't even have to go. And so I think there's a lot of places there where, understandably, if we start looking at those things, there are going to be questions. But I think we've got a great, very transparent process here in Columbia that we've built as a community to make sure we're only purchasing and utilizing the kinds of technology that makes sense. But from my perspective, I'm mostly worried about the risk management to the officers and to the citizens, and then building in more efficiency so that hopefully if we leverage technology appropriately, we should be able to cut down on how many bodies we need, even if that's just in little pieces at a time, right? If an officer can spend 33% less time on paperwork through that AI mechanism, that's a win for everybody. That's a win for the officer, the union, the taxpayer, the chief, everyone. So that's kind of how I view technology.
And we're trying to do that through a public safety lens. So
Yes.
the drone of first responder, it's a fire police program. It has applications on both sides, but why do it in silos and cost the taxpayer twice as much?
I saw a great demo on. I think they fully implemented in several cities in Missouri already, but a really interesting one that they had was, I believe it was in Detroit. They're actually experiencing negative response times because once the 911 call comes in, actually have AI can assess the 911 call, alert the drone, hey, there's a 7-car traffic crash on the highway. It pushes the drone out to get eyes up to actually see what that looks like before the call's even dispatched. And so it can actually get on scene and then provide to the responders and the supervisors, hey, you're going to need to come in from this side instead of this side because this is blocked, and you're going to need 2 ambulances. It is absolutely amazing, some of the things that can be done.
It's exciting and frightening all
It
at the
is.
same time.
It is.
Which is often the case with new technology. I had one question left, and David, if you have another one, I'm sure we've got time for it. My last question, and this is one that is completely outside of your control, as
Is this parking ticket?
No, I cannot fix your parking ticket.
Can you squash my parking ticket? No, the environment that this tax is happening, that the ballot is happening.
Yeah.
It is the state is doing its thing with the sales tax, income tax issue. There is the coming in November jail tax from the county. On top of both of those, as if that's not enough, we're also in a stressful economic period for people. With that combination of events, which is unfortunate timing for something like this, if you're someone who wants it to pass, for folks who have the anxiety from those, or they're like, oh, I don't like all this, I'm going to vote no on everything, whatever it might be, what would you say to citizens who maybe they don't have an issue with this, but they have an issue with all of that because of the environment?
It's a tough one, Nick. I mean, I think we're all on the same page with that. There are a lot of unknowns. Anything short of chaos is probably not giving the term the right due. So I think really where I'm leaning into, or when people ask me that, is, there are so many things that we cannot predict, but we can predict with this money that it is going to make lives better for maybe not you. Maybe you never call 911, but your neighbor, your family, your friend, it will. That is a known. That's why we put this together. There are many of those other measures that there are a lot of unknowns. This is a known entity. You can do something with this decision to help people.
I think too, and when we talked about the strategy of the timing, all things considered, if I had a DeLorean, I would have gone back and said, "But let's put this on in April
Of last year.
of last year." But
Yeah.
it takes those that just takes time, and thankfully, I mean, the good outcome was we got total council support on putting it on the ballot for people to look at. I think all those things considered, the mayor said something at a presentation recently that I appreciated, which was there's local issues and there's state issues, and those affect people in different ways. And I think she's had a really great way of explaining to people like, local control, local issues are really important here. And so we don't know. I don't know that I haven't figured out anybody yet who can predict what happens if like the state income tax thing, if it passes or does, like, I don't know of it. I haven't seen a really great explanation of that yet. And so I think that causes a lot of anxiety from people, but I don't really know what the outcome of that's going to be. We just felt like when we were asked, we said, listen, we can try to play this, and we are not like election. There's people that get paid a lot of money to figure out what, budget, what cycle you should put this on as far as voting. That's not us. We just said the need is not going to improve. The longer we feel like we hide the ball, 'cause what we didn't want to do, I don't like the fear factor thing. If we wanted to play fear factor, I could get out there and join this people who are like, oh my God, crime's out of control. And the numbers don't bear that out, right? So if that was true, that would be a great narrative, but it's not true right now. There's definitely things we need to work on, but it's going in the right direction. That doesn't change our capacity problem. It makes me nervous because the city's only getting bigger, but we don't want to play on the fears of people. And our biggest, I think, fear was if we keep waiting, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to get to the point where we're going to feel like fear mongers because we're going, we got to do something right now. Like right now that we are at critical mass. If we waited, we felt like if we waited even another 6 months, it would not, it was like waiting till, it's like when my stepkids used to come to me at 10 o'clock at night and say, I need poster board for this project that's due tomorrow. And you're like, why didn't you tell me this 2 days ago? Or even today when we were at Walmart. We don't want to do that to the citizens of Columbia. The need's there. If we feel like it needs to be addressed. And all we can do is our job is just present the current state of affairs and how we feel like we got here. We just want people to make an informed decision. We can't be mad at people about that. Just make an informed decision. Please don't believe all the things you read on the internet.
I don't really have anything else other than what the hope is that people don't collect all of the issues that you just mentioned, put them in a basket, and then say, I'm against them all. I think you have to hope that people will look at each issue separately and try to determine the importance and the necessity of it.
That's certainly the hope. Well, Chief Schlude, Chief Schaeffer, thank you so much for joining us. I will say one thing of many that we could say here, but one thing I want to make sure to stress that you kind of touched on, Jill, is our police department and our fire department, for better or worse, has lacked resources. Right, for years now, and yet it's been effective. Both departments have been effective.
Solely because of the people.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so if there was ever, if you're a business person, if you're a nonprofit, what do you invest in? You invest into things that are effective, right? That are getting you a bang for your buck. And I'm not trying to convince people to vote for this. I haven't made my own decision. I'll say that. And I told the chiefs that before we started recording. But that's one way to view it just from this conversation. So again, thank you both for coming on the show. I'm sure listeners will hopefully find this intriguing. If they have questions or concerns, who should they reach out to?
So you can actually email me directly. It's Jill, Jill.Schlude, SCHLUDE @como.gov. And I'm happy to answer anything. You can go on the website. That's a great place too to find info, but we're happy to answer any questions directly. And there's a meeting in each ward. So those meetings start today. We have our first one in Ward 6, but we will be going to each ward and doing some education.
And for me, just, contact Jill.
I can't answer his question.
And just a reminder for listeners, the website is oneforsafety.org. One is spelled out. We'll see you next time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We are continuing our series of talking to our stakeholders in the community about the public safety tax. As always, I'm Nick Knoth. This is the COMO Vanguard podcast, and I am joined by my co-host, David Lile. David, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this segment because this is going to be one that will help me to understand things in a different perspective and a different angle than what I've ever had the opportunity to understand it by.
That's the goal. So we had just sat down with Police Chief Jill Schlude and Fire Chief Brian Schaeffer, and to mirror that effort, we are now sitting down with Matt Nichols, who is the president of the Columbia Police Officers Association, and Zach Privette, the president of the Columbia Firefighters Association. Gentlemen, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm great. Excited to be here and talk about this. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys are burning it at both ends of the candle any day of the week, and that your role with the unions are volunteer positions that you're speaking on behalf of your brothers and sisters on in those unions. So before we get into it, I'd love for each of you, we can start with Matt, just to tell our listeners a little bit about your background in terms of whatever you're willing and able to tell us in terms of what do you do in the police force, the firefighters, how long you've been with them, why you do what you do.
Yeah, great. So I'm Matt Nichols. I'm the president of the CPOA. We represent about 99% of the membership of Columbia police officers and line officers, detectives, and sergeants. Been in Columbia almost my entire life, born and raised here. I was a CUPE, which, that could be a lightning rod for some folks, but proud to be a CUPE. Been in policing over 14 years, owned a business here locally, and then worked for a Fortune 20 company prior to that. Very, very deep roots. Family farm is here. My wife's family's farm is here. That's where we live, and very dedicated to the community. And I'll probably be in a hole somewhere around here someday.
Say that.
Well, but
sometime
when the time is right.
in the distant future.
Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah, I'm Zach Privette. I moved to Columbia about 11 years ago. I had 6 years in the fire service as a career firefighter in Southern Missouri. I organized their labor union there before I left into Local 152 out of Springfield. So that's where I kind of got my labor start. I'm currently a captain, serve on Quint 5 out on the northeast side of town. Don't have any union background like in my childhood coming up. A little bit of a legal background. So this is kind of a bridge between what I didn't go to law school and, wanted to pursue the black sheep family, part of the family, and be in the fire service. So everybody else in my family is professionals. I'm a professional too, just in a different
Professional firefighters. That's right.
In the firehouse. So, what I've learned throughout this process is that our members just don't always have a good voice. It's hard to speak up to your leadership. It's hard to speak up to administrations. And we find in the union that, a little bit of bullying from an administration or a fire chief or city administrator can go a long ways in tampering voices that need to be spoken. And, I've always kind of had one of those outspoken voices and don't get, bow down to power. And so I fell into this role right after I got here and on our executive board. A few years later, I was elected as president, and now my second term, I'll be up for election this December, I believe. So I look forward to serving our members. I also serve in the state level as well for the IAFF. I'm a vice president representing the north central Missouri region. I think I have 9 or 10 locals that I represent at the state level. So I love what I do. I'm proud to be a voice for our members and advocate on their behalf.
I want to pick up on something that the chiefs told us when we interviewed them at a different program. They were talking about the timing of this being on the ballot, and they were talking about the decision to put it on this particular ballot. So my question is, to go back to you all and representing the unions, what involvement and engagement did you have? And this kind of picks up on what you were just talking about, being involved and engaged in decision making. What was the process as far as the unions were concerned in saying, okay, we understand why it's happening now, we're behind it, or we're not, or whatever. Just the involvement as coming down the line that this was going to be on the August 26th ballot.
Yeah. So as far as our involvement goes, I mean, the issues that we're having as far as public safety here locally, there's not a whole lot of secrets. I mean, within our administration, we have a great dialogue. Chief Schlude is doing a fantastic job. She's coming up on 3 years now, and I hope that gets expanded for a very, very long time. I think as far as kind of the creation, we really didn't have a hand in. We asked very early on to, be a part of that discussion. There were some things that we've highlighted previously that we thought could, help fulfill the needs of the community, the department, and the city as a whole. And Chief Schlude was very, very open to all the things that we had conversations about, which were kind of a mirror image of the things that she saw and her command staff saw as needs. For us, it was a little tough with the city administrators. We brought forth ideas. We tried to have discussions. I think there was a bit of unknowing of exactly what it was going to look like, how it was going to look. And I think that as time has gone on, we've gotten a lot of clarification about what the tax looks like and, some of the nuances of it. But, really to kind of answer your question, I mean, we've supported the chief for a very long time, really wholly is in her tenure. And, we believe that she has got great vision for what the department looks like and how to keep the community safe. And So we really just kind of had a mirror image of what she saw.
Yeah, from our perspective, we kind of took a little different path. I met with our fire chief, and he helped kind of set the stage as to we need this funding mechanism. We have to have a new source of revenue. And so we kind of got together before this really became a big city issue and said, whatever we can do to find a new source of revenue, whatever that looks like, we're all in on together. And then we developed kind of what we would do with that from an internal perspective. If we had some money, what would we like to accomplish? You see in the campaign materials, our goal is to put 4 people on a fire truck every day. And those are the types of things we came up with long before this became, and out there, we're going to run a sales tax. And you'll remember, Nick, when you were on the council, I've constantly advocated for new streams of revenue, whether it was property tax increases that the city doesn't do, whether it was, a sales tax, or where can I steal money from another department really to pay for our bills to run our departments. And so it's been a long issue that I've advocated for, that we have to have new sources of revenue. When it came to the decision as to what ballot we were going to put this on, this is a tough election year. Politics are only going to get tougher with the income tax and property tax and all of the different things that are happening with the tax code at the state level. There was going to be no good issue. Statewide, we see over in like the St. Louis County area, if they're going to roll back property taxes that are funding all of those departments, they're looking to switch to sales taxes right now. So for the next few years, a lot of those departments are going to be running similar issues and initiatives. So regardless of what ballot it was going to be on, it was going to be something that we needed to work a campaign on. And you may remember from council's discussion, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but council was trying to get all these answers out of, basically they were running a campaign from the dais. And I was talking to some of the council members afterwards, and I said, we're going to run the campaign. You guys need to vote to put this on the ballot. Whatever ballot it is, we're going to run the campaign. And it's up to us to educate the voters. If it's an August primary, if it's a November general, if it's an April municipal, it doesn't matter. Put it on the ballot. Let us run the campaign. And so when it came time to make that decision, I'm kind of disappointed that council didn't do that sooner, because all it did was delay us in getting campaign materials put out there. But once it was done, we've been all in. I appreciate Matt and the CPOA coming on board with it too. And over the next few weeks, you're going to see tons of campaign materials out there in support of this tax, and hopefully get the voters on board. It's just there's no good election right now.
Right. I just and I appreciate the answers from both of you, and you've helped me understand that much better. I just also wanted to understand whether early in the process that they come to the people who this is going to most impact and say, and I liked what you said about what would we like to see, what would we like, and that goes back to what Chief Schaeffer had said earlier to us on one of the other programs about how let's come up with a plan, and then let's come up with a budget to support the plan, because you start with the needs, and then you say, okay, let's fund. Don't start with some pool of money and then say, okay, what are we going to do with the money?
Yeah, if we were to run a half-cent sales tax and we have half this amount of money, we're talking not even fulfilling our personnel goals, right? And so we needed to figure out what the budget was going to cost first, and then get to that. I will also say that we were involved with city management early. I know Matt talked about some meetings with them. As soon as we kind of kicked this off with management, we met with city manager in his office and his staff, and really we make sure we're all on the same page. This is what the fire chief has asked for. You guys are on board with that, and to be blunt, they recognize that without our support, it doesn't pass. So they knew they were going to have to work with us to get that done. And that's the leverage we have with them. So
I'd really love to hear from you guys, because everyone in the campaigns and the discussion we just had with the chiefs, and the next one we'll have with DeCarlin and his team, everyone's looking at kind of the billboard of this ballot, which is number of officers, number of police, number of firefighters, the buildings, blah, blah, blah. All important things, all meaningful. But I'd really love to hear from you guys on behalf of your organizations, and both of you. I want to stress for folks, these are not two retirees who are representing their unions.
No.
They are both full-time employees of the police and fire department, respectively. Share with our listeners what this ballot means in terms of everyday life for firefighters and for police officers if it passes, and then also if it doesn't pass.
Yeah. So I think if it does pass, I think it's going to give Chief Schlude the opportunity to really kind of do the things that needed to be done probably 20, 25 years ago. And that is have a plan to actually expand, to grow the department along with the needs of the city. They've thrown out a lot of numbers about, ratios of officers to citizens. We're way behind. I mean, and when I say way behind, like decades behind where we should be. And so if this does pass, it's going to give us the opportunity to retain people that we currently have. I think if we have a magic wand, maybe we even attract some folks back that can see the long-term investment that the community is making in public safety and the infrastructure, because we really are infrastructure. I think, in some degrees, we're as important as asphalt on roadways, right? It's one of those things that you've got to have a safe community. And so I think, part of it is making sure that we keep people, maybe bringing some people back, and having the ability to grow the department and the department needs in a much timelier fashion than if we just try and maintain the status quo. If it doesn't pass, we're back to our status quo. I think it's going to probably be much worse. I know that we are seeing some flattening sales tax revenue. I know that there are going to be other needs within the city that the community has said is important. And so we're, sharing money out of a pot that isn't growing. And so this literally could be life-changing for the men and women that serve in public safety.
I want to follow up on that, Matt, before we go to Zach on the same question, but to CPD specifically. And we just published an article on this morning in depth in terms of...
Amazing article, by the way. Loved it.
I appreciate that. Listeners, if you haven't read it, go read it. COMOVanguard.com.
Please, yeah.
Talking about the numbers and the data behind, because of the short-staffed nature of the police department, the mandatory overtime that's happening, and the burnout that's causing patrol officers specifically, the boots on the ground, to leave at a higher rate than any other part of the organization. How do you see this being impacted by the tax?
Yeah, so I think first things first, and I'll kind of give some perspective. I didn't give it earlier. So I supervise a night shift. I supervise specifically downtown and then south of Broadway is what I supervise overnights. And the staff that I have, of the 5 direct subordinates that I have about 5.5 years of experience between those 5. And one of those has 4.5 of that. And so I have a very, very young group of individuals. Most of them, this is their first job. And when I say first job, their first professional job in their career. And so when we look at the overtime, when we look at the officer burnout, you have individuals that are coming in that are working in a career that they don't have the previous experience and professional development to understand how careers work. And there's ebbs and flows. And, really, that makes things very, very tough when we almost immediately introduce them to, hey, well, yeah, you just worked 12 hours, but we had people call in sick. We had a critical event. That 12-hour day is now a 16-hour day, right? And maybe in some cases even longer. And I think that those are the types of burnouts that a lot of folks really don't think about. Is the more senior people that we, have lost to other departments, have lost to other careers, even to retirements. They've kind of got they have some calluses from those kind of things, right? They've been down that road, dealt with it. And so this is a little bit different. And so I think coming back to that, it really comes to this tax can directly impact those things, because we know that the long-term investment in the community with a tax like this is going to give the ability to bring better wages. It's going to attract and potentially retain more people. That's going to help kind of divert some of those workflow issues that we have and give people days off if they want them. Hey, you know what? Maybe instead of working a 12-hour shift, I'm going to work an 8-hour shift, because we have enough people to be able to answer those 911 calls that it's not going to be critical for me to stay. And so I think that's going to be the immediate and direct impact.
Zach, what about the firefighters?
Yeah. So back to your original question, about the tax. I have a line that I tell my recruits when I teach down at our academy, and I teach on there frequently. And the line is, there is no 912. People dial 911 and they expect us, and there's no backup plan. And this tax, in our perspective, there's no 912 here. There's no backup. There's no plan B. If we don't fund this, there's no better public safety. It stays exactly like it is. I might spill the tea a little bit here. I don't know if it's all the way out there, but the city, as the city's going through its budget process right now, department directors were asked to cut $7.5 million from the general fund. And as a part of that, the fire department had to give up new decision items. We gave up 2 1.5 vacant FTEs, and we're going to hold open some positions in order to make up that difference coming into the next year. That's personnel alone, not including operations and equipment. And so you can see that there is no growth in public safety. We know that the demand continues to rise and there's no growth in the funding to meet that demand. So there is no backup plan if this doesn't pass. We don't meet national standards for our staffing. We've never met them. Again, we can go administrations back in decades that haven't done their job in funding public safety, making the improvements as time went along. But staffing's the exact same way for far too long. Past administration said, yeah, this is okay. And we are now saying it's not okay, but we have to have the funding to do this. And so if it doesn't pass, there is no backup plan. And this is the public safety you're going to get. If it does pass, obviously the future's bright. We're going to hire staff. Our guys are going to get days off. Our response times are going to increase. The efficiency is one of these things you'll see as the campaign goes along. We've done studies with crew efficiency in 3 and 4 person crews. It's about 33% more efficient to have a 4-person crew than a 3-person crew. And what that means is that I can get people to victims in a house fire 33% faster with a 4-person crew than a 3-person crew. The studies are long. I'm happy to share them with you. But in a cardiac arrest, we have much better outcomes with 4-person crews than 3-person crews because the crew burnout while doing CPR isn't as bad. We can rotate them through. I apologize for my phone ringing over there. Anyways, what we see is we know the data. We know what the outcomes would be. The unfortunate thing is we just don't have money. And that's what this looks like. So the future's bright. I just told my guys the other day, we're kind of at a crossroads, right? There's the dirt road this way that's current, and there's a nice new freeway this way. And that's what it looks like from our perspective is, are we jumping on the freeway or are we going to continue down this dirt road that we've been on?
When you have contact with other police departments or fire departments that are not here local, I mean, you go places, you've described that, Zach, earlier, and you describe what the situation is in Columbia. What reaction do you get? Or what comparisons are there?
I'm happy to jump in there. I had
you'd be happy to jump in.
I had the privilege to travel to Lile Summit. It's probably been 3 months ago. I went to a leadership course out there, and they have a beautiful facility. Lile Summit's a gorgeous community. They have a beautiful police department and facility and training. And, the part of the leadership course, a big piece of it was networking with others, brainstorming ideas. What can we do differently? And a lot of it revolved around development of personnel. And so I came in and said, well, I've got, at this point I had 6 subordinates. One has since left employment with us. Had 6. And, these are the things I see. These are the things that I struggle with and, things that I'd like to do differently. And we had great collaboration and great conversations. And one of the things that I kind of knew but wasn't really prepared for was other supervisors were like, wow. Yeah, I haven't had a new person in a really long time. All of my folks have been here for 10, 12, 15, in one case over 20 years as patrol officers. And so I knew the answer, wasn't quite prepared for those sort of things. I think that the things that we struggle with, not every department struggles with because they do have the ability to retain and have the ability to bring in even folks that have previous experience from other departments, which we do to a limited degree, but probably not to as wide of a degree as other agencies do. And so, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so in the fire service, I obviously have traveled around. I was in Boston earlier this year for an executive leadership program, and I'll be in Arlington, Texas, next month for our convention. The fire service kind of one of those weird monsters where, a community decides what they want, right? And so some communities have decided they want 4-person staffing. They want new equipment. They want advanced technology. Right now, one of the kind of the prominent technological advances is drones as first responders. We see a lot up in the North and Northeast that departments are investing in the drones as first responders programs. Do we want that technology here? Is that what we want, is to be the leader in public safety? Or do we want status quo? Are we good with what we have? And from a leader's perspective, we're always looking to take that next step forward. I know Chief Schaeffer, one of the best in the country at looking at what's coming next, and it's challenged me to do the same thing. And so, when I talk to the other guys, there's departments out there that have complete 4-person staffing. It's not super common, but it is. That's the communities that decided to invest there. Financial things are the huge piece that I think we both recognize from the police and fire side is we lose a lot of people just because they pay better, simply because they pay better. Once upon a time, pensions were really important to new employees. After 2008, when pensions were gutted and went away, that hasn't become really is prominent. And then what we see now post-COVID is a lot of employees, they want their time. They need a paycheck in time. They don't care about all the ancillary benefits. They want their time off. And so we're having to adapt our personnel to that, which a piece of that is hiring more of them, right? We need more people so that we can give these people the time that they need. And so you see in those departments where there's better staffing that, people are happier with that work-life balance because they get their time off or they get their, the benefits that they have are utilized. Where we may get the benefit, that doesn't mean we can use it. And so it's kind of all over the board and all over the map. But what you see from the great agencies out there is that they're investing in their people and their technology in the future. And that's exactly what this tax is about.
While we're on the subject of technology, that's certainly a cornerstone of this tax ballot in terms of things that would improve. Switching over to the police side for a moment here, Matt, we put out on social media prior to any of these recordings, just soliciting questions from the community because we, David and I love hearing ourselves talk, but we also like asking questions that aren't our own. And I'd be remiss if I didn't share that, and I don't think anyone would be surprised by this. The biggest subject that kept coming up was flock safety cameras and privacy and surveillance concerns. We just had this kind of same conversation with Chief Schlude, and I'd love your perspective on that. Again, as an officer, especially one who's supervising young officers, what does it mean to you to have that type of technology and the other things that could be done with these new dollars? What does that mean? What's the impact it's currently making? What's the impact that can be made with that new technology?
Yeah. So the thing about, pieces of technology like Flock and, automated license plate readers is they're a tool, right? It doesn't have a brain of its own. It doesn't go out targeting individuals based on whatever. It is a tool that we use as part of investigative efforts. Flock specifically, the department has done a very, very good job of managing how those tools are utilized, how we access them. For every single Flock entry that we have, if we were to run a license plate and or descriptor of a vehicle, we have to have an associated case number or a CAD number. And that way we can document, right? We can go back and say, okay, well, what was the event that precipitated us needing to read those plates or whatever? The impact for us on night shift specifically, because we are very short staffed, it is an absolute force multiplier. I can give you probably 5 examples in the last week where Flock has been an immediate help. In fact, I just read an email earlier this morning. Last night, we were looking for an armed individual who had assaulted a couple folks with a firearm. Thanks to Flock cameras, we were able to locate that individual and safely get him into custody. There's any number of ways, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Flock cameras because I know it's also a lightning rod for a lot of people, but it is a tool. I think this tax can open the door for us to explore other types of technology. I know Zach talked about drones as first responders. Really, we are to a point with our staffing that any piece of technology that we have that we can use as a force multiplier to protect our citizens, take dangerous individuals off of the streets, locate missing children, whatever it is, right? We have to do that because that's what's in the best interest of the community. And there's elements of the oversight that the department has in place to help protect our citizens' rights. You may or may not notice I have a very specific tattoo on the inside of my arm here. It's a preamble to the Constitution, right? And so I don't even seeing those different technologies in the way that they're used, I still have privacy concerns, right? That's part of who I am and how I believe. And I believe that these are necessary for our community to keep us safe.
Can I expand on that just a little
absolutely.
bit? One thing I want to say about that and technology in general is our own safety. I have 160 plus or minus a few members. I know Matt has his department. When we can use that technology to have an advanced view of what's happening somewhere, or we can use that technology to keep people from a specific location, for whatever reason, our guys are safer. My guys get to go home to their families. Any of those technologies, whether it's Flock or whether it's drones with first responders or whatever we're using Dark Horse, for a lot of our future data. It's a data analysis program, but we're using that to determine where we're going to, put locations and people and trucks and all of those things. All of that matters to my guys. They get a safer outcome when we're staffed and they can see what's in front of them better. There are tons of examples that I can use. We were talking about the trench rescue up at the landfill just the other day. We have a drone up in the air and it's over that site before we even get there. We're pre-planning what equipment we're going to need, what the scene looks like, what the site looks like. All of those things are happening before we even arrive on scene. And I don't have a person that has to go put himself in that potentially dangerous area. We don't know what that is yet. And I think for the police department, it's the same thing. If they're using technology like that, they can have a view of what they're looking at and they can be safer. Our police officers get to go home to their families. So I think those are where technologies come in that people don't even think about are the people we represent.
I have a follow-up question for you guys. I'm just being conscious of this now. Both of you train new people coming into your departments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Technology, whether it's surveillance technology for the police or first responder technology for both of you and all these other things. How do you approach those subjects when you're training these young men and women coming into this field on how that's a tool, but also one to be responsible with and the difference it can make, but also the risk associated with it? I'd be very curious because this is unique that both of you are training people.
Yeah. So I'm happy to jump into that. We have very real conversations from the outset. I think when it comes to training, one of the best things that our department has implemented here recently is our own police academy. We should have done that 25 years ago. I mean, when you look at the number of people that we've brought into the organization that have left the organization and we've used, whatever outside training facilities, we should have been doing it ourselves because not only are they getting the post certification to be a licensed peace officer, but they're also getting to understand how we do policing. And that's very important because there are so many different things that we see as law enforcement in Columbia that a lot of agencies and cities around the state and country don't. And so I think that one of the things that I try and impress upon all of the folks that use these technologies is for them to recognize that it's a tool, right? This is a tool. It's a way for us to be able to identify and or locate and or solve whatever it is as part of the investigation. And outside of that, again, with the privacy side of things is we don't just willy-nilly, we don't have the ability to, but secondly, like we're really taking a look beyond what is immediate. Right. We have the ability to look up, Department of Revenue information, driver's license, privilege information and things of that nature. And so it really comes down to making sure that they understand the gravity and the nature of what it is up front. And I'll be super honest with you. I use other departments and other bad actors in policing as examples. And it's not uncommon for us, whether it be a use of force or whatever it is, when we have our shift briefings, we read articles, we watch videos, and it's almost exclusively open source things that have been in, the social media realms or whatever. And we have discussions about that because they have got to be aware that, hey, maybe this one event could have been done differently. How would we have handled that? What does our department policy say about what the events that occurred, the information that we knew leading up to events like this? And so I think really kind of that front-facing awareness and having discussion about it is what I found to be most impactful.
I'm glad that Matt brought up, their police academy. We've had our own academy for a long time. And as Chief Schaeffer's came here and we've developed that and grown, our academy motto is for them. Everything we do is for them. It's not for us. It's not for my personal gain or, Christian's down here and his personal gain. It's for them. It's for the community. It's for the citizen. It's the person who called 911. So we established that first. And then as we train them through, we set two things in motion right away: the standard and the expectations. And so when you talk about, what these technologies have, what access we have with technologies and anything, I mean, we have patient data and we, similar to them, but different, we have access to a lot of personal information of, the folks that we take care of in the community. And we set the expectation and the standard that we expect, and then we hold people accountable. And it doesn't matter if you're a chief officer or if you're the, probationary firefighter in the academy, you are not immune from accountability. And as a union, sometimes unions get bad rap about, protecting bad actors. As a union, we support accountability the right way, though. There's a process for accountability. We don't just, willy-nilly fire somebody because, we don't like them or whatever else. If there's accountability to be had, our guys take it. And, I sit through disciplinary meetings frequently with our guys, whether it's being late to work or doing something silly with technology or whatever it may be. I have no problem sitting in there and looking them straight in the face and saying, you did something bad and you're going to be accountable for it. Here's the accountability matrix that you're going to go through over this process. And I think that's the biggest piece of that, is holding people accountable. There are going to be things that happen. We're humans. Nobody's perfect, and they're going to make mistakes. My guys are going to make mistakes. Chiefs are going to make mistakes. The city manager is going to make a mistake at some point in time if he hasn't already. But regardless, how are we going to be accountable to that? And what are we going to do in the future to fix that? Whether it's policy development, whether it's training, any of those things. If we see technologies like that being abused or used in the wrong ways, we're gonna address it, and we're gonna hold people accountable. But setting the standard and the expectations early and often, and then holding people accountable, is how we handle it.
I have an observation. First of all, it's interesting to hear the overlap from what addressing Nick right now, what we're hearing with what we heard from the chiefs. Oftentimes, I mean, it's amazing the overlap, especially the importance of the academy being local for the Columbia Police Department is something that Chief Schlude definitely emphasizes, just as you did. My question, you grew up, or you're long-term Columbia person.
I am.
So Columbia has, I still think, a lot of people in it who think of Columbia as a town.
Sure.
And then other people who think of it as it's got to be a city. It's no longer a town. As someone who's grown up here and is now in the police business, how does that impact the person's perspective on what they see as public safety and how they support public safety?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, I guess I'm kind of an old soul. I still see Columbia as that, that small town that, on Friday nights in high school, and I'm in my mid 40s now, but, Friday nights in high school, we ran the loop. Right. That's what we did. And there may be a few listeners out there that know what that means. And so we have that now. It's definitely a different version from what I'm used to. But, I think the perspective on the difference between us being kind of that, that small city that Columbia was for a very long time, and the violence perspective and the crime perspective, we never really, it was never really that obvious. When I was growing up and really pre-social media, I mean, we knew that there were bad things that happened. We knew that there were crimes that occurred, but nobody really understood to what degree, right? Because we kind of lived in our own little bubble. And over the last probably really 20 years, the unbelievable expansion that Columbia's had, Grindstone Parkway. I jokingly, and I'm trying not to get off topic here, I jokingly took some of my new folks down there and told them that, hey, if you ever wanted to go to Nifong Boulevard back in the day, you had to drive this little 2-lane windy road down, called Rock Quarry Road, because Grindstone was hay fields, right? There was nothing there. And so anyways, so I think that, the perspectives from a lot of the citizens that we have now, many are transplants, right? And they're used to the larger cities, a larger infrastructure than what Columbia has. And Columbia's tried to play catch up and frankly has done a bad job of it. There's been bad planning, and I'm not trying to throw, previous city administrators or staff under the bus, but they did a bad job planning for the future. And it was, how quickly can we get big? Can we expand without recognizing the need for growth and good growth? And so I think overall, we have to find a way to bridge the gap between the belief that Columbia is a small community, a small city compared to us being or a small town and now becoming a large city. How do we do that? Right. And it really does take everybody being on the same page and having overlapping and adopting beliefs about what we want the community to look. And I think we're on the right path. I do.
There's a different way to police a town and police a city.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's what I think people have to process that through their mind to think, okay, no longer would something work from the 70s in 2020 something.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions I want to ask you guys that we asked the chiefs. The first question I have for you is, how would you respond to folks who say, I support public safety, I believe we need this funding, but not like this?
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would love to.
I need to take a drink.
You're good. So I hear you. And public safety support is not unilateral or bilateral. It's not a partisan issue. Public safety is an everyone issue. And what do you want from your public safety? What is it you expect? If your expectation is 4-minute response times from the fire department, whatever your response times, I don't know what your guys' response times goals are, but, quick response times from the police department, crime solved quickly, victims located, fires out quickly, medical patients saved and transported to the hospital quickly. If that's your expectation, you have to invest in it. What I hear a lot right now, especially in social media circles, is I support public safety, but I don't like the administration. I don't like the mayor. I don't like the city manager. I don't like the so-and-so and so-and-so. It doesn't matter who it is. You can't have it both ways. That's what I'll tell them. And I mean that. And I've talked to some of these folks that say that you can't support public safety and vote no on this. Those two things can't happen at the same time. If you support public safety, you support public safety regardless of who's the mayor. And we'll have a political opportunity to elect a new mayor or a new council member, but she's not on you said it the other day on another podcast, the mayor's not on the ballot. Public safety's on the ballot. You're voting yes or no for public safety, not for the mayor, not for the new city manager or a new city manager, not for, a state representative. And so to me, you can't say I support public safety and then vote and then advocate to vote no for this initiative. And it's a struggle that I think a lot of people, they want to connect those two political issues together. Public safety is not partisan. And it all comes down to, do you support firefighters?
Yeah, because if somebody's voting to punish some politician or to punish somebody or to express a dissatisfaction with an individual, they're really misplacing their anger or their punishment. Absolutely. Or whatever it is you want to call it.
Our firefighters don't deserve that.
Exactly.
Well, and as we've heard here today, whether you like the ballot or dislike the ballot, if it fails, the people who are going to be directly impacted first are not me. It's going to be the firefighters and the police officers who are already being burnt out and, used and abused, unfortunately, currently. Yeah. Right. Matt, did you want an opportunity to respond to that?
Yeah. So that's, love everything about, what Zach said there. And that really is, the CPOA, it took us a while to really come to an informed decision. We ended up having some membership meetings so we could, get a qualified response and feedback from everybody that, has got a stake in this and a voice in this, and we really had three options. The CPOA, we had the option, we could endorse it, we could stay neutral, or we could oppose this. And that's why we were very diligent in trying to seek out the information, not only from the city administration and city hall, but really even from city staff. And I think that there's more than a lot. There's a ton of misconceptions about what this public safety tax is and what, the city could be doing, right? I saw earlier today some comments about, well, let's use that $500 million in the Swiss bank account. You can't. We can't. There's literally, a good chunk of those enterprise funds are mandated by state law. We can't touch that money. Right? You just can't do it. And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that, and I think there's other misconceptions about, there's wasteful spending. Well, those are also priorities that the elected officials are, that have said we're going to do and we're going to have, because that's a priority for the community. And that's okay. All we're saying is that if we want to maintain the status quo, then vote no for this. If you don't want to maintain the status quo and you want a well-staffed, well-trained, well-rested police force that have the opportunity to have children and have lives and enjoy their jobs and, do all the things that we want great community members and employees to do, vote yes. And on top of all of that, we are going to have a safer community. It's going to happen. It is impossible for me to think of a reason where us taking better care of our people, having better uses of technology, keeping people longer will ever be a bad thing. It won't. This makes Columbia safer. This makes Columbia better. And overall, it is absolutely needed. It was needed 30 years ago. Didn't have. We can go down and yell and scream and, be angry at, Mayor Buffalo. She's only been the mayor for 4 years. I've been talking about this longer than 4 years. You know what I mean? I mean, we can only be angry at inaction that we have no control over. But now is the opportunity. We can change it.
Can I follow up on what he said? He talked about the inaction that didn't happen. I just told my members the other day, I want to I think we ought to give a little bit of credit to the current administration and the current council.
I agree.
You know, there's a piece of this that it takes a lot of political willpower, and a little bit of your political life is on the line to put a tax initiative like this on the ballot. And previous administrations, previous councils didn't have that willpower to do it. Even recognizing that we needed new funding mechanisms or we needed new sources of revenue, they just said, "Yeah, we'll kick that can right on down the road." So I think we need to give a little bit of credit to the current council, the current administration, to step up and say, "You know what? We hate it. We don't want to digest this any more than anybody else, but I'm going to put my political lifeline on the line and say this is the best way to get this done." So I think we need to give them a little bit of credit.
At least they put it on the ballot.
They're trying.
Right, because I mean, both of you know, we all three of us worked together when I was on council, and it's been a few years. This was discussed then.
Yeah.
We discussed a dedicated public safety tax when I was on council in that brief window, and it's only happening now.
Yeah.
So at least it's happening, and the people will get to have their voice finally, which is great. One other question I wanted to ask you all, in a similar vein, but a little different. And again, I asked this to the chiefs, and I'll frame it the same way, which is acknowledging that this is completely out of your control. The environment is impacting this vote, which is the political environment. We have the state tax issue that's going to be on the ballot, whatever you want to call that. We have the forthcoming November jail tax from the county. You have uncertain economic times that are stressing people out. People have, economic anxiety for good reason. All that bundled together is impacting this tax, this tax vote. Again, totally unrelated, right? In terms of it's no one's fault that that's the case.
Yep.
But it's impacting it. And I'm curious, again, someone's last question, if you were talking to a voter and they were saying, because of those factors, I'm kind of leaning towards voting no on all of it or something of that variety, what would be your response to that, knowing that I think we can all appreciate that position, right? Everyone understands the economic stress nowadays and with the other stuff going on. But if this is your opportunity to talk to someone who has that mindset right now, going to that August vote, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I'll go first on this. And it's one of those things when you're building campaign materials, that's something you have to take into consideration, politically. Obviously, you watch political operations do this stuff all the time and tailoring messaging. What I really would go get to is I hear everyone. We live the same lives. My members live that same life. I hear you. It's not easy to give up more tax money. It feels like every time you turn around, you're getting taxed for something. This is your home, though. This is your home. Those are your children. That's their future. What do you want that to look like? Step into 10 years from now, whether it's a police department or the fire department, and the emergency happens in your home. What do you want from that response? Do you want well-staffed, technologically advanced response with good equipment and a fast response time? Or do you want what you have right now? Today you get to decide what that looks like in 10 years. I get it. It's hard. It's a hard decision to make. And it's not one that, I would take lightly either when it goes to, when you step into the ballot box. We have allowed politics to ruin our lives on a daily basis in this country. And we get so caught up in the back and forth of what's happening in Jeff City or Washington, D.C. that we forget about our home a lot. There's a few people, you know who I'm talking about, that don't forget about council meetings here in Columbia. But a lot of times it's easy to throw on Fox News or, the local news, and you hear about what's happening in Jeff City, and they can barely get a budget out in time. That's then, shredded apart by the governor before he signs it. Or in DC, they can't pass a piece of legislation if they tried to. But what do you want right here at home? What do you want for your kids, your grandkids, your future? I know what I want for mine. I want them to go to good schools. I want them to have a safe community. I want them to be able to walk to a park, after school and not have to, just like we did when we were kids, I rode my bicycle all around town I grew up in, but I want that for my kids too. I want them to be able to experience that. And that starts and ends with public safety, whether it's fire or police response. And so I think that's, I hate to say, is a little bit of an emotional pull on focus on home first. Let's get our house in order, and we'll worry about Jeff City and DC later on because they ain't going to fix themselves. They haven't in 250 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I think, really, because this was part of the conversation that we had with a lot of our membership, and the city ran some numbers, and they said that the fiscal impact on I think the median household income was like $275 a year, right? Less than $1 a day. And I think that it's terrible that we have to go back to taxpayers and ask for more money. But like Zach said, this is home. If I had a hole in my roof and I had to put a bucket in my living room to catch the rainwater, and I had the opportunity to put a new roof on or just keep emptying buckets, what am I going to do? I'm probably going to put a new roof on
for a fairly reasonable investment.
for a very reasonable.
I mean,
I think,
yes, it sounds like a lot. 1%
well,
is a lot,
and
but
it-
it's a reasonable
it is.
investment.
It's not 2%.
Yeah,
It's not, but even if you think about that, and this goes back to my salesman days, I used to sell roofing, just so you know. We're not putting a 25-year 3-tap shingle on. We're putting a lifetime warranty
That's right.
metal roof on this thing,
That's right.
right? We are putting part of our infrastructure in that, God willing, we never have to go to taxpayers again and ask for more.
Or at least not for a very long
For
time.
a very long
Yeah.
time.
Right. David, any last questions for our guests?
No, I don't have any other questions. I've really appreciated this conversation. I appreciate the passion that you bring to this and the insights that you bring to this, because I think it's important, and I just hope a lot of people hear it.
Absolutely.
I also do.
Zach, Matt, thank you both so much for coming on the
Thank you.
show.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Thank
I
you.
always want to express appreciation. Thank you for serving our community. We know it's not an easy job, especially police and fire. So thank you for that, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
us.
you guys. Thanks.
We're joined this morning as we talk about the public safety sales tax for Columbia by Columbia City Manager DeCarlin Seewood. We appreciate him being here. And then also by the Budget Director, Matthew Liu. And so we're going to talk about this proposal that comes up for a vote in the August election. We've had opportunity to talk with several others who are directly involved and going to be impacted by this. So now we get to talk to those who are watching it from different perspectives. First of all, City Manager Seewood, appreciate you joining us. In your estimation, what needs to be done in the last few weeks before this election occurs, or this vote occurs? Is not an election.
A lot of communication. We're really trying to engage different community groups, engage different wards, just have the conversation about what we're trying to do and the why. And hopefully residents will have the opportunity to decide how they want to see us move forward. But it's those conversations that are really important.
I mentioned that we've talked to several people, the police chief, the fire chief, union heads for both the police and the fire. And the topic comes up, and I'm sure you've also spent a lot of time on this. This issue is overdue in many people's opinions. It should have been handled in a different way, maybe 25, 30 years ago. Why now should it be handled?
That's a great question. So, and you're right. It's something that the city's been talking about for over a decade. And I know in 2012, when you look at the city's budget, you'll see that that's when they started making some really drastic changes to programs and benefits and pay. And it's been this movement of how do we do more with less? And that's been our motto for over a decade. And we got to a point, it was, when I got handed the reins as city manager, we were grossly down for police officers, but employees as a whole. We could not hire. We could not retain. We had two classes of employees. We had those employees that had 20 plus years who were ready to retire. And we had employees that had 5 or less years because they just came on board. And those in the middle, we just couldn't maintain, we couldn't keep. And so we made the look and say, okay, what do we need to do? Let's look at pay. Let's look at benefits. Let's look at our organization as a whole. And we started making systemic changes. And you get to this point where if you're going to continue this positive momentum, you got to figure out how to fund it. And so we started looking at different ways and different mechanisms to actually fund operations. And so we looked at, what do we cost for our service? So we're doing a cost of service study. We look at what it costs to do the business of the city. We got to looking at the general fund. The biggest impact to our general fund is public safety. And there's a mechanism for a public safety sales tax will help us, grow that need. And so that's what we're looking at. And that's how we got there.
You meet with other city managers or mayors if they don't have a city manager structure, and lots of places have dedicated sales tax for public safety. Do they not?
Absolutely. And so we're not in this alone, and Missouri allows us to have just that. And so that's one of the things when you look at what are your opportunities. And I think that's the other question. People will say, okay, what else can you do? So it's a sales tax. It's a property tax. It's trying to adjust fees. And you can look at grants, but grants are usually a one-time thing. So you're not going to hire a police officer for a grant. And if you do, within 3 years, your budget has to absorb that person. And so you start looking at those mechanisms, and the sales tax is one of the things that when you look at how the perspective of the city as a whole. Our sales tax is not just for our residents, it's also for people that visit our community. And we are a very commuterized community. Our daytime population probably gets up to close to 200,000 for people who are coming here to either work or shop. And so it is a way of trying to say, okay, they will also help in what we're trying to do in order to fund our operations.
Nick, you're going to have to stop me if I jump ahead too far, but I'm going to ask the budget director, Matthew Liu, to chime in on this. We've heard from the guests that we talked to prior to today, talking to you two, that there is no plan B. So from a budget director's perspective, is there a plan B? And if there is not, then what are we looking at? If there is a plan B, please unveil it for everybody.
So as a director of finance, our plan B is basically the status quo, how we are going about things right now. There will be things in the future that if we do not receive these funds, that we will have to change. We will have to look at the services we provide, the level of services that we provide as well. We will have to look at our workforce because we will not be able to grow as we have in the past.
Can you describe for listeners how would you define this current status quo of city finances in terms of the outlook and how it's been going the last couple of years?
So our revenue grows at a pace of around 1.52% a year within the general fund. We saw some really big growth over the COVID or the pandemic years, but that was not a sustainable growth. That growth was because we've had inflation, and so everything costs more, so we received more money. But we also had inflationary costs with the things that we purchased. And so it was something that we could never catch up with. And so we've kind of leveled back off to where a normal rate of increase is. And that's, like I said, it's about 1.5% to 2% increase. And so our expenses are still growing at a pace that outpaces that. We're looking at expenses growing at around 5% right now. It was a lot higher than that a few years ago, but they are still much higher than our revenues are growing. And so with that type of issue, you either have to grow your revenue base or you have to grow the revenue that you're bringing in. And as a city, we don't have true control over that. We have some control over the revenue base. You know, we can market ourselves and try to get more sales tax driven businesses into the city, but that takes time. And right now we're at a point where we really don't have the time.
I can give you a good example. So in this proposed budget that we have right now, that we're developing, that we'll start talking about next week with the council, our revenues grew by $1.5 million. In order for us to give raises to our employees that are in the general fund, that's $3 million. So you're already starting from a point where your growth hasn't kept up with just pay. And so we went in having to cut $2 million before we even got started to talk about the new things that people want to get done. And so that's the perspective of where we're at right now.
I think one of the questions is prioritizing.
Yes.
And I'm curious as to your reactions to those who bring out their number one hit song when they're against taxes, and that is cut the waste, cut the fluff. Your reaction to hearing that comment.
And so it is a normal comment. That's where people go to.
Yeah.
And it's because I remember when this is anecdotal, when I was in high school for debate, when we talked about how do we fund our programs that we want to do for debate, it was by cutting government waste. And so I graduated from high school in 1990. And so we've been talking about government waste for a long time. If you look at Columbia's budget, when you look at the budget numbers, there's not a whole lot of waste. We've cut, we've streamlined, we've reduced. The biggest thing in our budget is people, which is about 70% in the general fund, and services, which is about 12%. And so we are a service organization. We put people in offices and vehicles to provide a service to our community. And those are the two factors that are the majority of lion's share of our general fund. When we talk about travel and training, that's less than 1%. And so for an organization that should be growing its employees, less than 1% of our funds go for travel and training. And we have 2 academies. And so that waste that people would like to say doesn't exist. And then there's programs that people look at, they like, well, cut the arts, cut the what they believe is waste with dealing with sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
You cut those programs and maybe you get $2 million.
Maybe you'll get $1 million. Those 2 programs alone are about $1.3 million, but they bring in about $1 million in revenue for both of them. So in all actuality, you're cutting maybe $300,000 out of the budget.
I think David's point is good. And again, as we've been having these conversations, not only on the show, but everyone in town's been having these conversations, right? And one of the things I've actually heard a couple times is kind of a different version of David's, which is framing the city's approach to this as we've done nothing and we're all out of ideas in terms of whether that's trying to cut things, as we just talked about, or trying other taxes or whatever it might be. And I think, a lot of this to me is impacted by things that are outside of the city's control, right, in terms of the broader impact. And I've asked this exact same question to everyone we've talked to, and so I want to ask it to you all, which is, again, thinking to the context of you don't have any control over this, but it's impacting you, which is the environment that this vote is happening in includes the legislature and the governor's push to eliminate the state income tax and then, most likely impact the statewide sales tax. There's the forthcoming county jail tax coming in November. And on top of that, as if those two things were not enough to multiply kind of the anxiety and stress for folks, you have the national environment in terms of we are in stressful economic times. A lot of people are struggling for one reason or another and to different levels. Now wrap all that up, and that's on top of the city's ask for a 1% public safety sales tax. If that is somebody's concern, and I think that is a common concern, what would be your response to voters as that's weighing on them before they go to the ballot?
And before you answer that, because in addition to that, you get headlines that the utilities wants a 10% increase in this, a 6% increase in that. So even though those aren't sales taxes, but those are still, if people are processing that, they're saying, oh my gosh, you're adding more to the expense of living in Columbia.
Yeah, and that's a hard one. And it's not something that we went into lightly. No one goes in thinking, okay, what I'm going to say, I want to increase taxes. No one goes in saying, okay, I want to increase fees. What's happened is because no one wants to have those conversations, we haven't done them. We haven't had those conversations for over a decade. We know some history. So we look back at 2012. That's where the city started making some really drastic changes because of its economy. We got rid of dispatching. And so we got rid of it, and it became part of the county. So the city no longer controls its own 911 system. We changed our benefits for our employees. And so when you talk to public safety employees, they'll tell you there's two pension plans. There's the pre-2012 pension plan, and it's the post-2000 pension plan. Our healthcare benefits, there is this pre-2012 plan, which is very rich, and then there's everyone else's plan, which is lessened. We stopped giving raises to our employees. We were balancing the budget by vacant positions, and that should have been that startling tale of we need to do something different. So we reduced services, we cut. And so that's what we've gotten to. And so we've gotten to this point where we really have to have a realistic conversation with our residents about where we are and where do we want to go. And it gives residents the opportunity to say, I believe in this. This is what I want. This is what my goals are. Let's work to get there. The one thing that we've done is we started this last year with having a conversation about to our residents, what is your number one priority? We asked that in our community survey. We asked it when we had our community summit. We've asked it on a couple other surveys where we've talked to people. And the lion's share has been the number one priority was public safety. We want to see more police and more firefighters. We asked the question is, would you support a sales tax for public safety? Majority said yes. And so that kind of gave us the impetus of we've had these conversations and people said that they're willing to kind of look at this. So let's put it on the ballot and let's voters decide which way they want to see us go.
Curious for listeners, and Matthew, this may be a question best suited for you. There's always a perception that folks look at the whole budget of the city of Columbia, which is it's over $500 million, right?
That's correct.
Something of that variety, not chump change, but a lot of people fail to understand how that money actually is available to spend for the city. Could you explain for our listeners how really what we're talking about, what this tax is impacting, is the general fund, which is what the city council, what city management has the most direct power over spending versus what is the vast majority of that over $500 million budget that's restricted and dedicated to specific things?
Yes. So the general fund is what you think of when you think of local government. It's your police, your fire, your community development, your public works, health. Those are the things that happen within the general fund. People don't really understand that the city as a whole is more like a parent company, and we have subsidiaries that we run as well that kind of filter their way up. It's not looked at that way because we are a city and we own our utilities and these things, but our utilities are separate entities. So take, for example, water and light. The money that water and light makes can only be spent on water and light. Water and light are about $250 million, something along those lines. So it's almost just those two departments alone are almost half of our budget. And so half of the money that we receive is water and light. So we can't take that money and say, I'm going to pay police with it, because you wouldn't do that in a normal business. Like say, for instance, here in town, MFA, you got MFA oil and then you have break times. You know what I mean? Break time is not paying for the activities of the parent company. They're contributing, but they're not paying for those activities. And so when you start looking at the budget in those terms, you can kind of understand more of what is going on. The general fund is the piece that pays for most of the government type activity.
Could you clarify? I think you said earlier, but just as a reminder, again, the whole citywide budget, over $500 million. The general fund is about what?
It varies about 135, 140 million.
So significantly less. And it carries the burden of all of the personnel costs, all of the vehicles and services that those departments that fall under it have to provide to the community.
That's correct.
And so that is essentially, to boil it down, that is the problem that this tax is looking to solve.
That's
Is
correct.
that within that 150-ish million general fund, the vast majority of that is public safety. And yet it's not enough to grow, right? The city has grown, but that budget hasn't grown proportionately to enable the police and fire to grow their ranks and their services to the community that has grown that they have to serve. And this solution is this 1% sales tax,
That's correct.
right?
Well, I can kind of piggyback off what you just said. So the public safety within the general fund. So the general fund is about 135, $140 million. Half of that is public safety. Half of that is dedicated to public safety. We have around 1,000 employees in the general fund. Half of those are public safety employees. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. We also have a health department. We're a little different from other cities because the health department usually falls within your county. Some of your bigger cities does have their own health department, but then the county also has their own health department. We are the county. We own the lion's share of the county and the city health department, which is not common. So, but we have to take care of those. We have to take care of that. We have community development. We're trying to make our city more livable. We have to take care of those needs. We have public works, streets, roads, improvements, gutters, all of those things that we have to maintain that we have to do with this little amount of money. And so what we would really like to do is to remove public safety from the general fund, start their own fund, and then the general fund can focus on things other than public safety. And then we have the fund for public safety that could be dedicated only for public safety. And so this will really help that situation.
But you're still going to use money that already is budgeted for public safety, regardless of this tax. I don't want people to
Absolutely.
hear
That
this
is correct.
saying that because what you just said is it will take public safety out of the general fund. That does not mean you defund public safety. It means that if this tax passes, you can look at public safety more as its own entity.
That's
Correct.
We would add to public safety.
Right.
So the general fund will still continue to support the public safety.
And I think the bottom line is just that people need to understand, and it's like with anything, it just costs a lot to provide good public safety.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the reason for this tax.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you look at how the city has grown. I think we've grown about in the last 10 to 15 years around 58%. That's population wise. When you look at the square footage, we've grown about 15 miles. And so we've gotten larger, both population and size wise. And so when we talk to the fire department and you talk to the fire chief, they look at how long does it take you to get from the fire station to a scene. So the further out you grow, that means you got to add an additional firehouse because you want to get there within 5 minutes. That's their goal. Their goal is to say that we're at a scene within 5 minutes. And when someone's having a heart attack or when there's a fire, you want them there quick. That costs. So you got to build this new station. So the new station is around $6 to $8 million. You got to staff that new station. So that's around 16 new firefighters. You got to buy fire trucks. So that's 2 or 3 new apparatus. And so all those costs is what we have to look at when we talk about the growth of this city. The one thing that we weren't doing, and we should have been doing, is we weren't looking at the impact of that growth that was occurring. we were growing and we were growing by leaps and bounds, but we weren't adjusting saying, okay, we need to add police officers because of our growth. We weren't looking at we need to add firefighters because of our growth. We weren't looking at we have to add public works guys because now we got to make sure that we're plowing the streets. And so that's where we've kind of got to, is that we've had this growth and we have not kept up with our operational wise to make sure that we continue our service to address that growth.
And sometimes it's very hard for me to think that growth doesn't pay for itself.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's easy to say you've got growth, you got more people, so they're paying more sales tax already. They're paying more property tax. So why doesn't growth pay for itself? And I'm not smart enough to answer. I don't know.
And so it does grow your economy. And so we can't say that it doesn't have an impact. But the other part of that growth is looking at, are you upping your staff to make sure that you're poised for that growth? Now, the city's really good about setting up plans, but you also have to make sure you're implementing the things that will address those plans. It was now I've been trying to work in Columbia for a long, and I remember when I interviewed for the assistant's job back in the early 2000s. And the question that they had at the time was, the city is growing very rapidly. How do we address the core to make sure that the sprawl doesn't affect the core of the city? So that's a question that we've been wrestling with for over a decade, and we just haven't quite got there. But what we really need to do is we need to really look at making sure that as we're growing, we're looking at what that impact is and anticipating that impact into our budgetary process.
I want to follow up on that. This is produce if citizens approve this, the numbers are saying that you all presented is this will produce 42 firefighters, 50 police officers, new fire stations or rehabbed fire station combination, new police headquarters, things like that. And we're talking about growth. The city has grown. I would imagine it's going to continue to grow. It's on that trajectory. Is this enough? Is 1% enough? And I ask that because, in my opinion, if you're someone who's going to go and you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to take the hit on this because I believe this is an investment our community needs, I'm going to vote yes, and this passes. I don't know anyone who's going to want to hear the city, whether that's city management, city council, the police chiefs, whoever, come back in 5 years and say, you know what, we didn't ask for enough. We need another percent. We need another 0.5%, whatever that might be. And so again, with that growth mindset of the city's going to continue to grow, this is playing catch up. Is it enough?
And so that's the reason why we looked at the 1%. And so we actually did our calculations. And so when we're looking at trying to look at a sales tax, we looked at a 0.5%. We looked at a 0.75%, and we looked at what that impact will be. And what you realize that if we did a 0.5%, it could answer some of the calls of the issues of today. It will not address the future. And so you would find yourself in 10 years going back saying, okay, we need another increase. And so with this 1%, we've projected outward. And what we know is that right now we're talking about 50 police officers, and probably within 10 years, you're going to add another 50 because we should have added 50 police officers 10 years ago. With the fire department, we're talking about 42 firefighters right now, which will get us to 4-person trucks. And in that same plan, we talk about in 2000 adding another fire station. Well, when we add that another fire station, that's another 16 firefighters that need to be added. And 2035, we're talking about another fire station. So that's another 16 firefighters that need to be added. So we've anticipated those growth and when we were looking at these numbers. And so, because I think that's where some people get looked at and they say, well, you're asking for this 1%. When we look at everything you're talking about doing, you don't need all that because in 10 years, you'll be fine. But we know we will continue to grow. And so this poises us to be supported and ready for that growth.
Quick question that I think is an easy one. One of the things that people have talked about also, and it was actually considered at the council meeting where this was voted on, was why not do a sunset? Why not have this come up like the public capital improvement right every 10 years so that citizens have an opportunity to vote on it again? I think there's a valid argument. I think there was a valid argument made at that council meeting. I think I would like to hear your thoughts on that again, because it's a valid question from citizens, and it's I believe, a valid argument for not doing it.
Yeah. And so what I'll tell you is that 85% of your budget is people. And so if you have a sunset that says that every 10 years you're going to go back, you're going to hire 50 police officers or 40 firefighters. And in 10 years, you're going to have to go back and say, defend your job. And so how do you recruit somebody with that expectation that if we don't get this, I'm going to get laid off?
Do you feel like you were going to comment?
That's a really good summarization of the issue. You just do not spend one-time money on ongoing expenses. And that's something that we've done in the past too, before we've kind of changed things. And that is some of the reason you get into the problems that you have. If you have ongoing expenses, you have to have ongoing revenue to support those expenses. And that's why you would not do a sunset on something like this, because people are ongoing expenses.
Yeah, there's no sunset on public safety. I mean, I don't understand why that would even be a conversation to say sunset, other than to try to persuade people to support it up front, which gets me to a question I wanted to ask in regard to, you spoke a few moments ago about how public safety, number one issue when people are asked. So there will be some who will vote no on this issue just because they vote no. I mean, they vote no on everything. And some people will vote no because they really think it's going to be a burden to pay more sales tax. Some people will vote no because they don't like the police overall, just the concept of policing. Why will other people vote no, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a distrust of government. There's this belief that we haven't managed our money right. And so those will be some of the conversations. And the one thing that we've done to try to show people what we've been doing is we've created a number of engagement opportunities. We have budget town halls. We have classrooms where we really try to show people exactly how we operate. No, it's one of the things that, when I first got here as a deputy city manager, we heard a lot about transparency. This city's not transparent. And so we made the conscious effort to make sure that there are no secrets. People can come in and see our processes. We want them to understand our processes. So we want to teach you to understand exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so there is this level of distrust, I think. But what I also think is some people will look at, what's the benefit for the city? When we talk about fire service and adding a 4-person crew, it will allow for a quicker response when they're responding to an emergency. When we talk about, bringing back some of the public safety units that we once had in the police department that we no longer have because we don't have the staffing levels. It will create a difference for our residents. And so my hope is that as we're talking about this, that we can be able to show people exactly what we're going to do, and they should hold our feet to the fire. I don't want someone to think that we're asking for a rubber check. No, we want to make sure that in everything that we do, that people can see what we're doing and why.
One of the requirements is for regular reports.
Absolutely.
I mean, to say how the money has been spent.
Absolutely.
I think that one of our previous visitors on this particular issue, made the point that sometimes people who support public safety and say they want more police officers or the top-notch firefighting crews and the right fire stations will vote no or be struggling to vote yes because of personalities involved.
Yes.
And they made the point that public safety is not political and it's not personality. It's what do you want for the community that is best for right here in your home.
That's the reason why local government should be nonpartisan. It's not about a party. It's about the people that we represent.
Well, and I'll also add, pick your council person that you don't like, listener. Everyone has one, I'm sure. Or that maybe you don't like the police chief or the fire chief, or you don't like DeCarlin or Matthew. None of these people are going to be here forever. The tax, if it's approved, if you choose to approve it, will be. One, because there's no sunset on it, but also public safety, as David already said, right, it is forever an issue. And so I would encourage anyone, if you're going to vote no on it, that's your right. Don't vote no because of that. Vote no for some other reason that is important to you. But don't vote no because of the personalities of people, because those people aren't around forever. Mayor Buffalo's not going to be mayor of Columbia forever. Police Chief Jill Schlude won't be the police chief forever. DeCarlin won't be city manager forever. If you vote no, vote for a different reason. That is what I would ask folks. Pivoting to a different subject on this broader subject, another question that's been asked quite a bit, again, a good question, which is why a sales tax? Why not property tax? Why not a combination? Why not increase fees? Why not, there's a million other ways that could have happened. Why sales tax? Why this specific course of action?
Yeah, and we looked at all those different analysis. I can let Matt kind of weigh in a little bit more, but when we look at property tax, I think we bring in $10 million in property tax.
11 million in property tax. Yeah.
And so even doubling that doesn't get you to where you need to be. Tripling it doesn't quite get you to where you need to be. And so it's one of those things where that impact would be such a greater impact for less benefit to the overall city.
Property tax is also only paid for by your residents. A sales tax is paid for by everyone. Visitors, whoever is in the town pays for a sales tax. Your residents should not hold the burden of paying for all of the public safety, because a lot of the times they're not the beneficiaries of that public safety. And so when we looked at all of the different sales taxes, things that we could do, sales tax was the thing that made the most sense. But also to go along with that, so this fiscal year, what we've done is we've done a fee study to make sure all of our fees are in line, or to at least bring them forward to say, hey, this is how much we're recovering for this type of activity. We've looked at our business license fees as well to make sure that those are in line with the cities our size, and that we're doing the correct things to charge our businesses for those services that we offer them as well. And so in we did not go in this blindly just saying sales tax. We have taken a look at all of the different revenue sources that we had to make sure that everything is in line so we can do the best that we can do with the money that we already have.
If this passes, would this be a vote of endorsement for public safety to receive raises that would be beyond what the rest of the city employees receive? An endorsement of saying, we are saying dedicated money because we know how important this or those departments are, fire and police.
Well, and so our goal is always to be equitable in our process. And so what we will do is we would do a rate study. We'll do a pay and classification study, which we've done before, to make sure that our salaries are in line with our peer communities. And so could you see an increase for police and fire? Possibly. But we'll look holistically at the state as a whole. We don't just go blindly and say, well, we're going to favor this group over this group. We want to make sure that we have an equitable approach when we talk about salaries.
I get that. I understand that. But the city would also be saying, we are speaking with our voice that police and fire are
Absolutely.
special.
Absolutely. But what we know is we did the rate and classification study for our salaries. I want to say we started it in 2021. I believe it went into effect in 23 or 24.
That's correct.
Our police salaries went from 52,000 to almost 60,000 to 60,000. And that's because we knew there was a need for increasing our salaries. And at that time, we went from being one of the lower paying departments to one of the higher paying departments. Within it's 2026, we've slipped back down.
Yeah.
And so that adjustment will still need to be made. And that's something we have to look at. This will allow us to do those kind of conversations to make those changes, correct?
I have a question kind of related to that, but not really, because it's asking, as a voter then, I think on the firefighting side of this, more fire stations and 4-person crews per shift rather than 3. I can quantify that.
Yes.
So for those who want to know, what would I see as a regular citizen difference with the police department?
Yeah, I'll give you a huge example. We talk about community policing. We talk about having a police department that's embedded in neighborhoods, that police officers they have a set beat, that residents know who their officers are. That's always been our goal. And I know the former police chief would say that community policing is our way of policing. When you have low staff levels, your department becomes reactionary. You can't do community policing. With this, we will be able to have a better operation-wise, so we can truly do community policing. When people in the downtown, they talk about the old downtown unit. We don't have the staffing levels to have that. We used to have a DUI unit. We don't have the staffing levels for that. Traffic unit is one. So if we have one officer assigned to traffic unit. So when there's an accident that occurs, trying to do a reconstruction to really understand the impact, we don't have the staffing levels to do that. So bringing back those staffing levels to provide that service that made us the jewel of Mid-Missouri is one of the things that we hope we can get to.
I would just say this, Nick's COMO Vanguard published report I thought was good, because DeMarcus Thomas Brown, who is the director of the Office of Violence Prevention, he made the comment that a lot of people, when they think about policing, they think, well, we need it downtown, which your office overlooks the downtown strip, which
Yes.
most people think of as downtown. But I thought that DeMarcus made the comment, which I thought was really good, that, there are neighborhoods where violence occurs or potential violent neighborhoods that get no attention because downtown calls these officers to large gatherings. And I think that's something also people need to understand, that it's not just the response to what's happening, in this case downtown, but it's the presence in other neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And so when you have that Friday or Saturday event where now you're pulling all your officers into the downtown area. No one's covering the other parts of the community.
So, David, thank you for bringing up the Office of Violence Prevention. That's been subject in my mind with this tax because it has occurred to me that one of the many things that have occurred under your stewardship, DeCarlin, as city manager, was the establishment of that office and the investment in it. And at the same time, and maybe this is a poor framing of it, so I apologize if that's the case. I'm curious, how is the public safety tax going to impact the work of that office when they seem so interrelated, but I don't see any money from the tax going to support the Office of Violence Prevention?
All right, the Office of Violence Prevention is still supported by the general fund. It's in the city manager's office. So it's not necessarily affected by this tax, but with the proper resources going to the police department, it should assist with some of the things that this office is doing. And so that partnership is still there. I mean, the one thing is that when we talk about our city, while we may have different funds and different processes, we're still one Columbia. And we really work really hard to make sure that we have a unified approach to all our operations.
Is that office, as you stated, right, kind of from an organizational perspective, it's housed in the city manager's office in terms of like division. It's not part of the police department. Does it work closely, frequently? Does it have a good relationship
Yes,
with Chief Schlude and her leadership team?
absolutely. In fact, they have a operating board, and the deputy police chief sits on that board, and so they have regular conversations, regular approaches to make sure that there is a uniform approach to make sure that they're in sync.
So pivoting to a different subject, but one that I'm compelled to bring up, even though I don't want to, because we've discussed it a million times. But we had put out for our listeners, we solicited questions on social media, different platforms. The number one thing, not too surprisingly, was about the question of flock safety cameras. Is any of this money from the tax revenue going to indirectly, directly, whatever, support the use of flock safety cameras? And I would quantify or summarize really the overall subject as there was no again, in this microcosm of social media, love for flock safety and the city utilizing and contracting with them. And so I'd love for you guys to speak to that from the management perspective. We obviously heard Chief Schlute's perspective and the union's perspective in terms of using modern technology and the impact it can have and the risk associated with it. But again, I feel compelled to bring it up to give you an opportunity to address that.
Well, I mean, flock's already here, and so whether this passes or not is already part of our budget process. Well, I'll say about the flock camera system. When I did my State of the City address, one of the stories I talked about was two young kids that I think they were aged 2 and 3. They were in a vehicle at one of our hotels, and someone stole that vehicle, and they got caught down 70 because of flock cameras. Now, and I get, there's this concern about surveillance and what does it mean, and how do we make sure that we protect our citizens from being over policed? And so modern technology is here. It's how do you utilize that technology? The one thing that the council did when we decided to move forward with Flock is we created a process. So there's an annual report that talks about the use of technology. There's an annual report that will talk about what's being done, what's not being done. There's an audit system to make sure that we're auditing our usage of Flock to make sure that those abuses aren't occurring. And so we put mechanisms in place to protect, but we also have to make sure that as we're growing as an department, we're adopting the technology and adopting the resources to make policing better and make it safer.
I don't have much more to ask or anything, but I'll go to Matthew Liu and in the finance department that you direct. And this is not the most important thing of this matter, but if this tax passes, how much more work does that put on your department?
It will put quite a bit more work on the department, just in terms of the budget and sort of the background to that, how we create the budget, creating chart of accounts that account for the money within the budget. So it'll be some work, but we are set up to handle that type of work. So I don't necessarily foresee this being like a heavy burden that we would have to add staff or something for initially. So I think we are set up to take care of that issue.
If this passes, when will it go into effect, and what budget will start taking it into account?
So if this passes, it'll go into effect and we'll start receiving money in January of 2027. That would mean that the budget that it would take hold in would be the budget of fiscal year 28. And so that would start October 1 of 2027. And so that's when you would start seeing budgeted and start seeing us prepare for it.
I also want to circle back, perhaps briefly, perhaps not, to an earlier conversation we had, and I think Matthew answered at the time, but to Carlin, feel free to chime in of, essentially, if this fails, then what? And I know kind of the answer that we received, and similar to Chief Schlude's and Chief Schaeffer of like, the answer is essentially a status quo, right? We're stuck where we are currently, which I also view that as like, well, okay, well, that's not a plan. That's the situation, right? Because the problem is that the status quo isn't sufficient. And so if this fails, I guess I'm re-asking the question of what does that actually mean? If this fails, and we're stuck, so to speak, with the status quo, what is city management, Carla and your team, going to do to ensure that public safety continues to be supported, continues to be what the community needs it to be, even if said community votes against the tax to help fund it?
No, and I think that becomes our reality. What it leads to is a lot of hard conversations. This budget year that we're about to present to council wasn't an easy discussion. Like I said, we started the conversation with looking at our revenues grew by $1.5 million, and just to look at raises alone was $3 million. And so when you look at the other things that people were asking for, I think we got up to around $11 million. And so the proposed budget that I looked at in June was well out of balance. And we have to pass a balanced budget. So we went in and we made those hard decisions. We looked at programs and said, okay, what can we do without? We looked at services. What can we reduce? We looked at, how do you look at some of the new things that people ask for and said, okay, so what are you willing to give up in your existing budget to get that new thing? And that became part of the conversation. So it'll be a lot more harder conversations. I will leave it with you when you look at our general fund budget. 70% of it is people. 11% of it is services. And you find yourself having to cut and you have to reduce. And so that's where you find yourself as making those hard decisions of what can we do without? What services can we reduce? What is that impact from reducing that service?
So what in the discussion of the budget that is going to be passed right now, what are an example or two of departments or services that would be cut?
I won't say the departments were cut. What we did was we reduced a lot of our service lines. We held vacant positions. We removed some of those vacant positions. We created a process where some of the positions that people wanted were just not approved. I think we got to the point where I think we have a net of 2 new positions that may be proposed.
We're down to.
Oh, we're down 2 positions. So we removed 2 positions out of this existing budget. And so it's those hard conversations. And so I think if you tune in to our first budget work session, which is Monday,
right,
and it'll be at the Public Health Department, there's going to be a spreadsheet will kind of show some of the impacts to the budgetary changes.
Well, I think this is a good place for us to wrap it up. Matthew, DeCarlin, any last comments to listeners? Anything you wish them to know? Wrapping it up, it just popped in my mind. But Matthew, do you want to speak to the very classic and old school thought here in Columbia about the city's Swiss bank account, and why don't they just tap into that?
So it's understandable because people interpret things differently. I think the Swiss bank account came about because the pension fund was actually investing in UBS, which is the United Bank of Switzerland. And so they do investments with UBS. So technically, I mean, I guess you could say the pension does have a Swiss bank account, but not in the terms that are being set forth. So we have the city operates on a budget of about $600 million. To spend $600 million, you have to have $600 million. I mean, that's not something that you can just say, I'm going to spend this amount of money with no plan from where it's coming from. And so the money that we have, more than half of it is dedicated to something already. So you have to set money aside for capital improvement projects. Those are restricted. You have to set money aside for certain other activities like debt. That's restricted. And then you have your utilities that the money that they receive is restricted for their purposes. And so that just leaves a very small amount of money that we can actually do things with. And a lot of that money that we have that is left over is not recurring money. It's money that is sitting there, and if we spend it, it's gone. And so for people to understand that, we've also created a web page to kind of explain to people what our cash balances are and what they do. This is also something that we explain quarterly at council meetings with a report to council. We create a finance report to council that is in the council meeting monthly. But quarterly, within those reports, we do a cash balance report. And so this is something that if you truly want to know what our cash balances is, what we spend our money on, it is available and readily available for people to find out.
All right, I appreciate that. Any comments to Carlin?
Yeah, I just want people to stay engaged in our process. Come to our budget work sessions, attend our budget town halls. Really understand what's going on. For this public safety tax, we created a website. It's oneforsafety.org. And so it's an opportunity for residents to see exactly what we're talking about, what the plan is, and ask us the hard questions. I don't want people to feel like the city doesn't want to have conversations or the city doesn't care about what our residents want. No, we really want to hear from people. And I get it. No one wants to see taxes go up. And that's not something that we went in lightly saying, okay, we just want to raise taxes. We really want to make sure that we provide the best services that our residents want and deserve.
For listeners for this segment with both of you, if they have specific questions that they'd like to expand on, whether with Matthew or yourself to Carlin, what's the best way for them to contact your offices?
So there's a website. And so we have the Be Heard website where they have a question about ask the city manager. My email is cmo@como.gov. And so they can send emails to that. They can reach out to the contact center. They have my contact. And so there's different mechanisms to reach out to really ask those questions.
For us, you could email finance@como.gov, and we will be happy to answer any of those questions. I would like to say that for this particular budget, between now and September, we will have 8 different opportunities to speak on the budget. These will be some formal, some informal opportunities to speak. And so there are many chances to come and talk with us about the budget, about the city finances. We try to be extremely transparent and available to the citizens.
All right. Well, this has been the COMO Vanguard podcast. Thank you, Matthew Liu, Finance Director for the City of Columbia. To Carlin Seewood, thanks for coming back on the show. And David, anything from you?
No, I hope people listen to these things. And I know it's kind of a waste to say that at the end of the third one that we've done. But I think that I appreciate the time of both of the administrators for the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll find out sooner than later. For all things COMO Vanguard, please go to comovanguard.com. Thanks for listening.